Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day on Ind AS 116. I've received a request from one of the students, Mr. Nitin, that whether the Board of Studies can arrange revision lectures for May 22 attempt. I'll raise your request. Okay. So let us just hope that something will work out. The Board of Studies will definitely address it. Okay. Before we commence today's topic, a quick recap of what we did. Prior to Ind AS 116, there was AS 19, and it was my mistake. It's not 117, it is just Ind AS 17. So Ind AS 17 or AS 19, both of them dealt with the concept of finance lease and operating lease in the books of the lessee. So this created serious comparability issues, which we discussed with the help of an example. And as a result, Ind AS 116 came into force. Okay, so Ind AS 116 removes the concept of operating and finance lease as far as the lessee is concerned. Instead, it brings in the concept of what we call as a right of use asset and a lease liability. Basically, whether you are taking the asset for some part of useful life or the entire useful life, whatever it is, you are getting the right to use the asset, and therefore 116 rightly tells us that you have to recognize an ROU asset. At the same time, you will have to recognize a lease liability in your books. So when we moved on to discuss the definition of lease, the definition of lease worded something like this. Okay. When we talked about lease, it spoke at lease being a contract or a part of a contract, which brings us to another important concept that we have to check each contract whether it is a lease. So that part is fairly clear because the contract itself will be worded in a way such that it gives us an idea that it would be a lease. However, we have to also look at contracts where the legal form of the contract is not a lease. But if you go behind and check the substance of the contract, it appears to be there appears to be a leasing arrangement. So a part of a contract, does it contain a lease or not? We will have to check that up. Okay, so we did this with the help of the example of NPCL and Inox having a theater within the premises of the township of NPCL. Okay, where the tickets were priced at 300 rupees per ticket to NPCL. So apparently it looks like NPCL is purchasing tickets for employee benefits, but in substance, NPCL was controlling what would be screened, was designing the entire what you can say, the sitting, the setup, everything. So therefore it contained a lease arrangement. All right. So for the above purpose, what do we mean by a lease? A lease is a contract that conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset. So when we talk about an identified asset, this identified asset, an asset could be an identified asset when it is physically distinct. That means it's identifiable. You can identify that this is the asset which is being controlled. And at the same time, the lessor should not have a substantive right. The lessor should not have a substantive right to substitute the asset. Okay, so substitution should not be possible. For example, you have Infosys that enters into an arrangement with, say, Ola or Uber to ferry its employees from their homes to the office. Now, if you enter into a contract where it is just ferrying of a sedan, then the sedan could be any sedan that Uber has at its service. So that is not meaning an identified asset. In such a case, it would not be a lease because Uber can any day substitute the sedan with another sedan, of course. So there is no identified asset. And when there is no identified asset, there is no question of what you can say, lease being present. And then we also saw physically distinct. That means the asset should be independent. When you talk about portion of assets, a particular capacity, a particular portion should be physically distinct, like a floor in a building. Or when we speak about an asset where what passes through the asset, it's not physically distinct, then whether you are covering substantially the entire capacity of that asset. So one part is portion of the asset, the other part is capacity of the asset. So this was about identified assets. Then we spoke about what is you mean by substantive substitution rights, where we discussed practical ability, which is possible in the case of Uber, whereas in the case of say malls, for example, where this centralized air conditioning is available, practical ability to substitute the air conditioning facility does not exist. Okay. The lessor would benefit economically from the exercise of its right to substitute the lease. So that also we have discussed. Okay, the Uber driver getting an airport drop for another customer, so you substitute it. So the Uber company is benefiting economically from this, and therefore it has a substitution right. Okay, so this was what we discussed. I have a question. Sir, does breach of protective rights affect the treatment of lease? Breach of protective rights will obviously cancel the lease itself. Okay, so in that case, how the treatment will be there, we will look at that towards the later part of the standard. But yes, it affects the lease in the sense the lease gets cancelled, the lease gets terminated. Okay. So what will be the treatment? We will have a look later when we look at modification of lease, reassessments, all these things are still pending. So that point of time, we will be discussing it. Okay. So substantive substitution rights we discussed. Thereafter, we also discussed what do you mean by right to control the use. So right to control the use again had two factors. The first one being right to obtain all the economic benefits from the use of the asset, and the right to direct the use of the identified asset. So this was what we had seen. So this is something which we have already gone through. We saw the case studies also in this regard. Okay, so now with this background, let us move on to our discussions for today. Okay, so I hope that so far the things were clear. In the previous class, I had a query by one of the students that are there any amendments in FR? As far as FR is concerned, the conceptual framework is a new chapter that has been added in your portion. So that is the only amendment that I have seen. Okay, so that is something you would have to probably focus on. All right, so now with that background, let us come to the next set of topics, okay, for today. All right, so now let us take the example, let us take our discussions further, our examples further, and now consider a case where you have two lease arrangements. Lease one is an unfurnished accommodation. Lease one is an unfurnished accommodation. That means you just get the space. Whereas lease two is a furnished accommodation. Now the question arises, what is this unfurnished accommodation? Only property. Whereas when we talk about furnished accommodation, it is property. Ayush is asking, can the lessee give the right to use to any third party? Definitely. If your lease arrangement permits subleasing, then you can give it on a sublease. So you have the right to use the asset. You are subleasing it to somebody. Okay, so somebody else is getting the right to use. Okay, so in a sublease, we have that also as a special condition, the accounting treatment for a sublease, where there is the original lessor. The original lessor gives it on lease to what we call as the intermediate lessee. The intermediate lessee will give it on lease to the final lessee. So the intermediate lessee will also become an intermediate lessor also in that case. He has the right to use the property. This right to use, he further hands it over to the final lessee. So subleasing arrangement is what you're talking about, is what I can understand. So there is a possibility that you can give the right to use to a third party also. Okay. So when you talk about furnished accommodation, it is property plus furniture and fixtures. Okay, so this is what is there. Okay, now obviously rent in lease 2 is going to be greater than lease 1. Sir, why is that so? Arey, obvious ki baat hai. It is having a property also. It is having furniture and fixtures also. You have a sofa, you have beds, wardrobes, fixtures, air conditioners. All these things are there and the entire flat is given to you on lease. However, in an unfurnished accommodation, you have to bring in all the fixtures. You have to bring in all the fixtures. So therefore, lease 2, the rental arrangements that will be there in lease 2, the payments that need to be made will be greater than that for lease 1, obviously. So now the question arises, look at this arrangement. In lease 2, can I say that there are two separate lease arrangements? Can I say that? One is lease of property and the other is lease of furniture and fixtures. Can I say that I have two lease components? Yes, I have two lease components. The first lease is that of the property space itself. The second lease is that of furniture and fixtures. And when this is the case, Ind AS 116 requires you ideally to recognize two ROU assets. The first one is right of use of the property. The second is right of use of the furniture and fixtures. Okay. This is the scenario when ideally you should be recognizing two right of use assets. The first one being the property, the second one being the furniture and fixtures. Sir, is there any exemption to this? Is there any any way where the split can be avoided? Answer is it's rare, but Ind AS gives you the guidance on when the split should be done, when you have to do the split between two or more lease components. The split has to be done. Separation should be done if all of this is there in writing. Don't worry, I'll be sharing the presentation towards the end of the sessions. Separation should be done if the lessee benefits from all the lease components. The lessee benefits from all the lease components and components are not highly interdependent or interrelated So you should separate. How we separate, we'll come to that soon. But first thing is, you will have to separate if there is a single lease payment. For example, for the furnished accommodation, if your lease rent is 6,50,000 per annum, if this is 6,50,000 rupees per annum, then you will have to split it between what should be for the property, what should be for the furniture and fixtures, Okay. So now this split that should happen will happen if the lessee benefits from all the lease components. In this case, does the lessee benefit from the property? Definitely. Does the lessee benefit from the furniture fixtures given along with that property? Definitely. So this condition is satisfied. The next condition should be the components which are there, they should not be highly interdependent or highly interrelated. Okay. So if that is the case, what do you mean by not highly interdependent? Well, in this case, the property lease is not dependent on F&F. The F&F is not dependent on property. They are not interrelated with each other in a way that they start to affect each other in a very intimate manner. Okay, I can give you one more example where we look at highly interrelated components. Okay, for example, you take a retail space. In a mall. Okay, you take a retail space in a mall. There are two categories. The first one is only the shop. You get only the shop. The shop does not have the facility of centralized air conditioning. Whereas in the second case, you get shop plus the mall's HVAC plus high heat voltage and air conditioning. All this kind of arrangements, everything comes from the mall plus the centralized air conditioning of the mall in entirety. Okay. So therefore, in the shop that you are renting it out, that you are taking on rent, you are also having ducts of the air conditioning which flow into your mall. Whereas in the first option, it's only a shop. You will have to put in your own split air conditioners. You will have to put in your own, what you can say, fixtures, etc. Whereas in the second case, at least nothing related to air conditioning. Now tell me, are these components, that is the shop and the air conditioning facility, are they highly interrelated with each other? Definitely they are. You cannot modify the HVAC of the shop without affecting the HVAC of the entire mall itself. Okay. So you cannot what you can say, just a second. Okay, I'll do that. All right. Now, you cannot separate these components because the HVAC system is directly related to the shop that you are renting out, and the retail space that you are renting out is highly interdependent upon the HVAC. Agar HVAC nikalna, if you have to remove the centralized air conditioning system, then it will require a great structural alteration of the mall itself, which will not be done. And therefore, when this is the degree of interdependence, interrelation that you are having, there is no need to separate the lease components. But in our example, when you are having furniture fixtures, as well as you are also having the property space given to you, which are not highly interrelated, then at that point of time, the separation is mandatory. Okay, so separation ideally is mandated. It is mandatory in the case of two or more lease components. All right. Now the question arises, sir, how do we split it? And the standard gives guidance in this regard. Let us assume that as per the lease agreement, you are having property, and you are also having furniture and fixtures. Both of them are lease components, separate, and together the lease comes to 6,50,000 per annum. What the standard tells is, you look at the standalone prices. Of these lease agreements. Okay. That means in the same locality, probably in the same vicinity, you look at what is the rental value of the property alone. And then you say, if I take only the property, the lease rent will be 6 lakh rupees. Okay. If I take only the furniture fixtures, it comes to 2 lakh rupees. So therefore, 6 plus 2, the total standalone lease should be 8 lakh rupees. This is the standalone price, something which we have also seen in Ind AS 115 that deals with revenue recognition. So now, what the standard tells, you look at standalone prices, and once you have an idea of the standalone prices, you will split this lease of 6,50,000 in the ratio of the standalone prices. You will split the 6,50,000 in the ratio of 6:2. So when I talk about 6,50,000 in the ratio of 6:2, that comes to 4,87,500. that comes to 4,87,500, and the balance goes to your fixtures. That means 1,62,500. That comes to 1,62,500. So this is a lease agreement split of lease components based on what? Based on the standalone prices of individual lease agreements. Okay. So you look and you come to know that the standalone price of property is 6 lakhs, of furniture fixtures is 2 lakhs. Total is 8 lakhs. So you will apportion 6 lakh 50 as 4,87,500 for the property, 162,500 for the lease agreements. Okay. Now the question is, how will I then do the accounting? You will then do the accounting by recognizing an ROU asset and a lease liability for the property. And then you will recognize an ROU asset and lease liability for the furniture as well. And then you will recognize the ROU asset and lease liability for the furniture. So suppose I will extend this example further. This is a 5-year lease. This is a 5-year lease with, let us say, a discount rate of 10%. With, let us say, a discount rate of 10%. Now you are going to pay the lease of 6,50,000 every year for 5 years. So the present value annuity factor comes to 3.791. The present value annuity factor will come to 3.791. We'll come to accounting treatment in detail, but I'm just explaining to you how this lease agreement will be treated in the financials. Okay. So you will have ROU property to lease liability. To lease liability, this is going to be 4,87,500 into 3.791. So 487,500 into 3.791, that gives you 18,48,112. 18,48,112. And when you do the split for the furniture, it is going to be ROU furniture account debit, ROU furniture account debit to lease liability. To lease liability, 1,62,500 multiplied by 3.791. How the accounting will happen, we'll come to that, but this is just a brief understanding. 6,16,038. 6,16,038. So this is how you will do the accounting. You will have two separate ROU assets. One is the furniture, the other is the property, and accordingly you will make the split and do the accounting. Now let us assume that these components are highly interrelated, are highly interdependent on each other. And if they are highly interrelated, highly interdependent on each other, then you will not do the split. You will not do the split. Instead, you will record it as ROU furnished property. This is just for an example of the accounting. ROU furnished property account debit to lease liability. This comes to 6,50,000 into 3.791. So 6,50,000, 3.791 comes to 24,64,150. 24,64,150. Obviously, this total 24,64,150 is nothing but the total of 18,48,000 and 6,16,000. That comes to 24,64,150. Okay. So if they are highly interrelated, you will follow this method where you do not split. But if you get benefit from both the components and they are not highly interdependent, not highly interrelated, then you do the split and record two separate ROU assets and record two separate ROU assets. Is it okay? Yes, and two separate lease liabilities. Okay. just a second. Any queries so far? I have a query from Ayush. 1 second, please. Have you guys understood? Okay, so I have a query from Ayush. Sir, you mean to say that if any component with property is inbuilt with the property, then separation need not be done? When I talk about inbuilt in your case, Ayush, inbuilt means what? It is highly interrelated. You cannot separate it. If you separate it, there will be a lot of what you can say structural alterations that are required. There would be a lot of structural alterations that are required. And when you require a lot of structural alterations, that means the structure is embedded or interrelated with each other. So therefore, the separation is not required in such a case. In every other case, okay, but that is not the thumb rule, that inbuilt properties, but generally, yes, you can take that into your what you can say understanding. Okay, so you have two separate assets. Okay, so I got a request also from the Board of Studies ki after I discuss every concept in English, let me just give a brief summary of that in Hindi. All the students, particularly like me who are from the South, I've explained the concept in English. In brief, I will just do it up in Hindi. तो अगर आपके पास दो separate lease components है, एक है आपका से फॉर एग्जाम्पल प्रॉपर्टी स्पेस और दूसरा है आपका फर्नीचर फिक्सचर्स, तो हमें दोनों लीज कंपोनेंट्स को सेपरेट करना है, प्रोवाइडेड दो चीजें फुलफिल होती है. पहला चीज क्या है? द फर्स्ट थिंग इज आपका दोनों कंपोनेंट या दो से अगर ज्यादा कंपोनेंट है तो दोनों कंपोनेंट या उससे ज्यादा जितने भी कंपोनेंट है लेसी को फायदा होना चाहिए. और साथ में वो दो या दो से ज्यादा जो भी हमारे कंपोनेंट्स है वो हाईली इंटरडिपेंडेंट नहीं है, एक दूसरे के साथ उनका रिलेशनशिप बहुत इंटरडिपेंडेंट नहीं है. अगर ये दो कंडीशन फुलफिल होते हैं तो ही हमें सेपरेट करना है. हम सेपरेट किस बेसिस पे करेंगे? हम सेपरेट करेंगे बेस्ड ऑन द स्टैंड अलोन प्राइसेस. स्टैंड अलोन प्राइसेस मतलब जो मार्केट में प्राइसेस अवेलेबल है, आप वो प्राइसेस देखिए एंड उस हिसाब से उस रेशियो में आप लीज कंपोनेंट्स को सेपरेट करेंगे. लीज कंपोनेंट सेपरेट करने के बाद आप दो या दो से ज्यादा अलग अलग आरओयू एसेट्स एंड लीज लायबिलिटीज रिकॉग्नाइज करेंगे. अगर सेपरेशन पॉसिबल नहीं होगा क्योंकि हमारे कंपोनेंट्स बहुत ही ज्यादा इंटरडिपेंडेंट है, तब यू विल रिकॉग्नाइज all the entire lease as one single lease arrangement. Okay, so this is the case. Now the question arises, sir, if standalone prices are not available, so in our case I have a lease arrangement and I have standalone prices. Sir, standalone prices नहीं है, property and F&F. This is 6,50,000. Standalone prices नहीं है का मतलब क्या है? In the vicinity, in the surrounding areas, you do not have any transaction that shows that property is leased individually or F&F is leased independently. Sir, if that is the case, then what are we going to do? Both the standalone prices are not available. That point of time, you will go to Ind AS 113 that deals with fair value measurement, and you will carry out a fair valuation exercise. And in this fair valuation exercise, you will try to maximize the use of observable inputs and minimize the use of unobservable inputs. For example, in your area, standalone prices are not available, but a little further from your area where such transactions are there, you pick up the fair value, make some adjustment on account of change in location, and then determine the fair value. That point of time, we will not call it as standalone prices, rather it will be the fair value. Okay, fair value कैसे करेंगे? Maximize the use of observable inputs, minimize the use of unobservable inputs, determine what is going to be your fair value, and on the basis of those fair values, उन fair values के ratio के हिसाब से, you will do the split between the lease components. You will do the split between the lease components. Let us take one step further. Let us take one step further. Sir, if I have the standalone price of only one component, I have the standalone price of only one component. That is, suppose the property lease is worth 6 lakh rupees. Okay, standalone. Furniture fixture, I do not have a standalone price. Next preference goes to fair value. If I cannot estimate the fair value also by virtue of not being able to maximize the observable inputs, then what I'm going to do, then I will follow the residual approach. Then I will follow the residual approach. मतलब क्या, आपका standalone property का value रहता है 6 lakhs. So that will be taken to be the standalone property lease component, and the furniture and fixtures component will be the residual amount. That is, in this case, it would be 50,000. When am I going to follow the residual method? I will follow residual method if I have standalone prices for all but one and I am unable to determine the fair value of the residual component. That point of time, the same standalone prices will be the componentized values of 6 lakh of individual items, and the last item for which there is neither a standalone value nor a fair value, you will take that to be the residual value. You will take that to be the residual value. Okay, so that is going to be your separation principles. These are going to be your separation principles. Okay. Sometimes lesser. Okay, so now I'm having another question from Ayush. Sir, practically sometimes the lesser charges some reimbursement for using some equipment. Does it also relate to split or what? Okay, Ayush, I think you have attended this standard before, right? So your queries are one step further of what I'm going to explain. Okay, so I will explain the concepts and then we shall move on to understand what the concepts are there, and then if you have any query you can ask. Okay, but let your queries keep flowing in. Okay, I will address them as a part of my session. Uske baad bhi agar aapka koi query rahega, then please feel free to ask. Okay, so this is your split that happens. Okay, so I do not find the regular crowd, that is Vidula is not there, and Srinidhi, Jay is there. Okay, Sai Ram used to attend. I'm not finding these guys. Okay, so let me know if you are there. Okay, but I hope you guys have understood separation of lease components. I hope you have understood separation of lease components. Okay, so now let us just quickly come to our theory, whatever we have discussed. Yes. So separation of lease components. You have 2 or more lease components in the arrangements. So it is possible that a single lease contract may have multiple lease components. Example, lease of a furnished flat. In such case, it is important to separate the lease components. How will you separate? So like I've given the example, separately identified assets such as F&F, building, retail space. I have also included HVAC. We will see why that is not there. Okay. Lessee can benefit from the use of each asset. That is important. And so both the conditions have to be fulfilled. The underlying asset is not highly interrelated or highly dependent on other assets in the contract. Okay, so F&F and the property space, they are not highly interrelated with each other. So that point of time, the split is required. However, HVAC and the retail space are highly interrelated. You cannot separate the HVAC without a structural alteration to the whole unit. And therefore, when you cannot separate them, that point of time, you will be recognizing it as a single lease component, no need of any split. Separation of lease components which fulfills the above conditions is mandatory. There is no practical expedient for non-separation. Separation would be on the basis of what? It would be on the basis of standalone prices for each component. If standalone prices or fair values are not given, academically what you can do, the given breakup would be the standalone prices only. This is academically. Okay. This is academically. All right. Srinidhi, I told you if standalone is not there, you try to estimate the fair value. Even if then you cannot estimate the fair value, then you take it to be the residual approach. Okay, Srinidhi. So first thing is standalone price. Standalone price is what is available in the nearby vicinity. Okay, the market value. If that is not available, then you look at fair value. Fair value means what? Not necessarily your market area. You move a little further, you maximize the observable inputs, look at other areas. If there are any property standalone leases and F&F standalone leases, try to get the fair values from there. If even those fair values are not available, then at that point of time, you cannot estimate. Okay. Now you cannot estimate what this F&F, if you give it on rent, what it will fetch you. You cannot estimate because you are not in the business of renting furniture and fixtures alone. You are in the business of renting out a furnished apartment. You do not rent F&F all alone. And therefore, you cannot exactly pinpoint and identify what will be the value for that furniture and fixtures. And when you cannot pinpoint and identify, that point of time, the standard says, do not go for a highly unreliable estimate. Okay. Like do not take a estimate of future cash flows you are going to get from renting, because that will be a highly judgmental estimate, a highly subjective estimate, which does not appear to fulfill the conditions of reliability, which is one of the fundamental characteristics specified in the conceptual framework. So therefore, what the standard tells, if fair value also cannot be estimated, go for the residual value approach. And of course, you will have to give the disclosures why you have taken the residual value approach. Is it okay? So that takes care of your query, Srinidhi. Okay. Where standalone price is not available, same can be estimated by determining the fair value by maximizing the use of observable inputs. But kabhi fair value bhi nahi hota. You cannot exactly estimate the fair value. What do you do that time? That time you follow the residual method. Okay, so this takes care of separation of lease components. Is it mandatory? Yes, it is mandatory. In which case can you avoid? Only if the components are highly interrelated or highly interdependent upon one another. If that is the case, then you can avoid it. Okay. Now we move on to, now this is a fairly simple concept. Okay. We now move on to the next concept, where your lease arrangement contains, and this is what was Ayush's query also. Achha, before that, one thing is I forgot to tell. Many times, the lease agreement will give you a particular breakup. The lease agreement itself will give you a particular breakup. Like for example, in this case, the lease agreement will tell the property lease is worth 6,50,000. Along with the property, the furniture and fixtures is given free. So all that you have to pay me is 6,50,000. Apart from that, you do not have to pay me anything for the F&F. I am bundling the F&F and giving to you in the 6,50,000 annual lease rent that you are going to pay me. Now, though the breakup is given in the agreement, you will not follow that breakup. I repeat, you will not follow that breakup. You will do the breakup exactly as we discussed. That is, first preference to standalone, then to fair value, and then to residual value. You have to follow this approach. Okay. This is drawn from Ind AS 115, where we are now recognizing revenue depending on performance obligations. Ind AS 115 is the revenue standard, revenue from contracts with customers. 115 deals with a similar arrangement where suppose you go to buy an air conditioner and the air conditioner comes with a 5-year warranty. So the supplier will normally tell you, I'm selling you this AC worth 40,000 rupees. It comes with a 5-year warranty. Now, the supplier, earlier he used to record under AS 9, he used to record the revenue of 40,000 immediately because the AC was transferred. And for the 5-year free warranty that is there, he would make a provision. But now 115 has changed this entire setup. 115 says you will recognize the revenue depending on the performance obligation that you have fulfilled. When you sold the AC, you have two performance obligations. The first performance obligation is delivery of the air conditioning. The second performance obligation is fulfilling the warranty service. Now, you as the seller are telling, look, I'm pricing only for the AC 40,000. For the warranty, I'm not pricing anything, but that is highly unrealistic. The value of the 5-year warranty is already included in the cost of the AC, and therefore in Ind AS 115 also it tells us that you ignore whatever split is being told by the supplier. You will compute the standalone price of the AC only without servicing. You will find out the standalone price of the servicing component only without the AC, and then you will do a split of those prices. And suppose the split comes as 35,000 for AC, 5,000 for servicing component. You will recognize 35,000 as revenue when the AC is delivered to the customer. You will recognize 5,000 as revenue over a 5-year period on a systematic basis or generally a straight line basis. This is how the standard has now been modified as far as revenue is concerned. The same principle is drawn here. In 116, that do not pay any attention to the breakup which is given in the agreement. Do not pay attention to that. You will do your splitting depending on the standalone price or the fair value or the residual value. Is it okay? So this is what we have to understand. Okay. So the next part that we are having is, all right, so this takes care of lease and non-lease components. The next thing is lease and non-lease components. Lease and non-lease components. Okay. All right. Fine. Sheena Jain is asking, sir, in the previous example, if the standalone price of the property is greater than 6,50,000, then what are you going to allocate to furniture and fixtures? Okay, so that is what I assume. Okay, so the standard obviously goes by the belief that the lessor is a rational person. Okay, business wise, he is a rational person. If the standalone prices in the surrounding areas for the property is 6 lakhs and he intends to give the property along with furniture fixtures, the lessor is a person of sound mind and he will give it for something more than 6 lakh rupees. Okay, so your question is highly academic in nature, which is not having a practical application. Okay, in the sense that no lessor will give the rent for a furnished accommodation much less than the standalone lease value of the property. ऐसा हो ही नहीं सकता. It cannot happen. So when that is the case, that query is already self-addressed. Okay, Sheena. So I hope you have understood that. Okay. So we move on to the next part, that is lease and non-lease components. And this is where Ayush has asked, sir, practically sometimes the lessor charges the reimbursement for using some equipment or what? Okay. Sir, but the bifurcation of lease rent given in the agreement itself represents standalone price. Not necessary. I told you not necessary. Okay. Like the lease agreement will say 6,50,000. Along with that, furniture free. Arey, how can furniture go free? Are you doing some kind of a charity? Go to standalone prices. Property is only 6 lakh rupees. So therefore, you cannot give furniture for free. In your commercial dealings, nothing is given for free to anybody. So the bifurcation that is given in the rental agreements is what it is, just a split for convenience between the parties. But when you have to do the accounting will actually happen based on what? The accounting will actually happen based on the standalone prices. The bifurcation will happen based on the standalone prices. 6,50,000 is the total of all these rentals. Yes, it is for a year only. It is for the full year. It is for the full year of all the lease rentals. That is property, furniture, fixtures put together. Okay, put together. All right. Next one. Okay, so that covers all the queries. We now move on to the next concept, that is lease and non-lease components. Okay, so let me build up on the earlier example once again. I have a lease arrangement. I have a lease arrangement. In this lease arrangement, it contains property, which is a lease. It contains furniture and fixtures, which is again a lease components. And yes, Mahendra Kumar, it is necessary and mandatory for segregation, even if it is free, because in substance, the lessor will not give the furniture for free. अरे वो क्यों free में देगा भाई? Why will he give it for free? वो तुम्हारा, is he your relative? Is he somebody close to you? Why will a lessor do something free for a lessee? नहीं करेगा वो. He will not do anything for free, and that is the reason you will not take that as the breakup. Okay, you have to do the breakup based on standalone prices. ठीक है? All right. Sheena did not get your query. I hope it's addressed. Okay. Ayush Sharma, bifurcation of lease rent, I have explained that. Okay. So now we move on to property, furniture, fixtures and maintenance. Now see, in this lease agreement, you have the lessor giving the property on rent to the lessee, giving the property on rent to the lessee. The rent that is being charged is for property, it is for furniture fixtures, it is also for something known as maintenance. Now, when you are in the society, when you are using the benefits of the society, the lessee is using the benefits of the society, the lessee has to pay some maintenance. But the society rules are such that the maintenance charges are levied on the lessor, that is the owner of the property. But owner is not staying. Now, who is getting the benefit of the maintenance? The benefit of those services, like say for example, a clubhouse or the swimming pool facility that is there within the complex, or for example, you are having a banquet area, or you have sports field for your kids, or you have a clubhouse. All these facilities will be enjoyed by whom? They will not be enjoyed by the lessor because he's not staying there. It will be enjoyed by the lessee. It will be enjoyed by the lessee. But the lessor is paying maintenance because the owner of the apartment pays the maintenance. And therefore, the lessor will charge a particular amount, let us say towards maintenance. Let us say towards maintenance. And now, for that reason, this lease arrangement is, let us say, it comes up to 7 lakh rupees. It comes up to, let us say, 7 lakh rupees. So this maintenance, now coming to a lease agreement. What is a lease? For a lease, two things should be there. The first thing is what? Identified asset. Identified asset. The second one is right to control the use. Right to control the use. These two things should be there for a lease. When I take property, does it meet the requirement of lease? Yes, I have an identified asset, that is the property, and I am deciding how to use that property. I can stay there, I can sleep there, I can use it for my business, I can use it for conducting sessions, I can do whatever I want in that property, and therefore this becomes a lease arrangement. The same applies to furniture fixtures also. It is an identified asset. Yes, I can identify the furniture given by the lessor. Can I use it the way I want? Yes. Today I can put the bed in a particular direction. Tomorrow I can shift it. I can shift the dining table to a different area. I can move the furniture wherever I want, because it is the property where I am using it the way I want. So furniture fixture also is an identified asset with a right to control the use. But when I talk about maintenance, maintenance means what? Outside your building, you have garden maintenance. There is a sports complex that is being there. There is a clubhouse. Now, all these items, you are enjoying the benefit. But asset kidhar hai? Where is the asset? That asset is not what you are having, right? You do not even direct how those assets should be used. You are just enjoying those facilities. There is a walking track in your complex, for example. In that walking track, what you can do is you can enjoy the facility of that walking track by taking an early morning walk or a jog in the walking track. But can you direct how this walking track should be designed? Can you direct in what direction should it go? Can you direct what plants should be planted? No, you cannot. You are just a member, a person staying in that complex who has to enjoy the services. So that walking track for you is not an identified asset. That walking track, you do not have the right to control the use. Rather, you have only the right to enjoy the facility that is being made available to you. And therefore, the maintenance that is being charged by the lessor to you is not a lease component. It is not a lease component. It becomes a non-lease component. So now, in one lease arrangement where the lease amount is 7 lakh rupees per annum, I am having property, which is a lease component. I am having furniture and fixtures, which is a lease component. I am also having maintenance, but maintenance is a non-lease component. And therefore, how do I do the split? Well, you will do the split again in the same manner. So you will look at the standalone prices. And what was the standalone prices for property? Well, standalone price for property was 6 lakh rupees. The furniture and fixtures in our example was 2 lakh rupees. And maintenance services, for example, was, let us assume, how much can I assume? Let us say 75,000 rupees. Okay. So, 1 second. Yes. So this comes to, on a standalone basis, 8,75,000. Now you will do the splitting. Now you will do the splitting. 7 lakh in the ratio of 6 lakhs is to 2 lakhs is to 75,000. So therefore 7 lakhs divided by 8 lakh 75,000 into 6 lakhs. So the split will be 4 lakh 80,000 for the property. It is going to be 7 lakh into 2 lakhs, 1,60,000 for furniture fixtures, and it is going to be 60,000 for maintenance. It is going to be 60,000 for maintenance. Sir, how do I account for it? Well, you will be having, my friends, an ROU property asset to lease liability. This is the first part. Okay, number one. Second, you will have an ROU F&F to lease liability. This is the second part. And third part is the maintenance. Can I say ROU maintenance? And the answer is no, you cannot, because it's not an identified asset. Number one, you do not have the right to control the use. You are having the right only to enjoy the facility. And therefore, this is not an Ind AS 116 item in the first place. So you will have to remove this 60,000. That is why the split is being done. This 60,000 will come out of the purview of Ind AS 116. And I will treat it in a manner that is prescribed under a particular Ind AS other than 116, whatever would apply to that, or I would, treat it in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. In most of the cases, your non-lease components, what will happen? The non-lease components will go into P&L. So you will take it to P&L. Okay, so the maintenance cost, that is 60,000, which you have identified, will not be a part of the lease ROU asset or a lease liability, because it's not an asset in the first place. So where will you take it? You will take it to the profit and loss account. That is your general GAAP treatment. Is it okay? Yes. Have you understood this part? Yes. So Ayush, the lessor charges the reimbursement for using some equipment. So this is the example that I gave. The lessee uses the common areas and the lessor recovers a maintenance charge for that. So how are you going to treat it? Well, I will do the splitting, and the non-lease component, being the maintenance in this case, is going to move out of Ind AS 116, and generally it will go to the statement of profit and loss. Oh, you don't have to apologize, Vidula. Okay, that's perfectly fine. तो अगर मेरा लीज कंपोनेंट भी है स्टैंडर्ड में, नॉन लीज कंपोनेंट भी है, तो नॉन लीज कंपोनेंट, लीज कंपोनेंट दोनों को हमें सेग्रीगेट करना है. लीज कंपोनेंट तो रहेगा ROU एसेट और लीज लायबिलिटी में, जबकि हमारा नॉन लीज कंपोनेंट है, जैसे मेंटेनेंस का खर्चा है, वो जाएगा सीधा हमारे प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस अकाउंट में. ओके, सो आर वी हैविंग एनी डाउट सो फार? शीना, आर यू देयर विथ मी? यस guys, any doubt so far? Please answer. Have you understood or not? We've still not started the exact accounting. Okay, accounting will probably move into the next class. Okay. See, I have a bad habit of telling names of students who are not there because I see them regular. Okay. So don't worry about that. Okay. So Priya Garg has confirmed. Mahendra Kumar has also confirmed. Okay. So it's all fine. Now, this takes care of split between a lease and a non-lease component. कैसे split करेंगे? Same principles in the ratio of standalone prices, in the ratio of standalone prices. The other things are also the same like they were earlier. Okay. So now we move further. In the case of, now please pay attention, lease plus non-lease component. In the case of lease plus non-lease component, the standard gives an exemption. Is this exemption mandatory? No, sare exemptions are optional. Okay, it is an optional exemption. Now, what do you mean by optional exemption? What is the exemption that is given? The exemption that would be given in this case is that you can choose not to split the non-lease component separately. Instead, you can include it as a part of your lease liability. So let me again take forward that example. Your lease agreement was property, F&F, maintenance. Total was how much? So total was 7 lakh rupees. This is a lease component. This is a lease component. This is a non-lease component. Now, you have the option to avail an exemption. Sir, what is this exemption? It is an optional exemption. As a matter of accounting policy choice, the entity in its accounting policy must state that it is our choice not to split the lease and non-lease components. And therefore, when this is your choice that you have availed, then what are you going to do? You will split this 7 lakhs in the ratio of the components standalone prices which are under lease. So your property is worth, this was 6 lakh rupees. This was 2 lakh rupees. Nothing will come here. Nothing will come. So this comes to 8 lakhs. And now when you do the split here, it will come to 7 divided by 6, 5 lakh 25,000. And this comes to 1 lakh 75,000. I will allocate nothing to the maintenance component. Sir, what is going to be the impact if I avail this exemption? You can see the impact clearly. My property value is 5,25,000. The lease value per year, 5,25,000. Whereas here, it was 4,80,000. That means what is going to happen is my lease asset and lease liability will be overstated. Sir, why overstated? Are Baba, what was there for the maintenance is now getting allocated to the property also, to the furniture fixture also. And that is inflating the ROU asset and the lease liability. But in DS 116 says it is okay. All right, it is fine, because ultimately ROU asset, where it will go, ROU asset will be depreciated over the lease agreement. The lease liability also will ultimately end over the lease agreement. Ultimately, the lease liability will give a finance cost. The ROU asset will give a depreciation. Ultimately, all of them will go to the P&L. And this will happen over the lease term. So when that is your treatment, it is not going to be a serious case of overstatement, because ultimately the components are flowing to your profit and loss account, and hence Ind AS 116 gives this facility to avail an optional exemption. You get this facility. All right, again, do not look at the breakup given in the agreement. Your breakup should be based on the standalone prices, or what we call as the fair values. Sir, don't you think after choosing this exemption, our liability side is getting unnecessarily increased and it doesn't depict the true and fair view of financial statements? I agree. I agree. But the financial statements, the conceptual framework also talks about two things. One is materiality. Okay. Generally, this is not a very material aspect in a lease agreement. That is the non-lease component. Generally, it's not. Second one is look at always the cost benefit analysis. When I have to give a true and fair view presentation, what is the cost of presenting that data? That is the first thing. This is given in the framework. Remember, we have to stick to the framework. Ind AS overrides the framework, yes, but ultimate base is the framework itself. So you look at the cost to give that benefit. Second, to give that true and fair presentation. The second one that you look at is what is the benefit that I'm going to get by giving this information. Now see, you are going to avoid taking this 60,000 to the P&L today. Okay, but this 60,000 is going to property 4,80,000 partially, and it is going to F&F partially 1,60,000. So 4,80,000 became 5,25,000, 1,60,000 became 1,75,000. Now you are marginally increasing the liability and the ROU asset, but ultimately where does this liability and ROU asset flow? Ultimately it flows in your P&L. So therefore your argument of true and fair view holds correct on an accuracy basis, but we are not interested in accuracy. Even if you look at the framework, accuracy is not important. What is more important is giving a fair presentation. I am presenting a fair picture. I am expensing the ROU asset in the P&L over the lease term. I am going to recognize the finance cost of the lease liability over the lease term. So ultimately my expenditure goes in the profit and loss account. And when we look at the accounting, you will ultimately see that the depreciation and the finance cost, the combined sum of that is ultimately equal to the annual lease rental that we are going to pay, and therefore it is in no way going to affect my true and fair view. It is just that I am going for a convenience that reduces the cost of compliance, at the same time maintaining a balance between the true and fair presentation framework. Okay, which is perfectly acceptable in this case. Okay, there are umpteen cases where we move to a true and fair presentation. Okay, not only in Ind AS, even in practical life. Okay, there are umpteen cases where practically you have to follow something. Okay, whereas in reality, how do we present the data? That you are also aware of it. Okay, so practical implications are there of this exemption. Avail this to avoid the standalone price finding and doing the split. Okay, this is optional. Okay, this is optional. See, academically it is simple for us to do the split because standalone prices are easily available. It's given in the question. Okay, but in practice, if you have to search the standalone prices or the fair valuation exercise, then that requires a huge cost, right? And when you require a huge cost, you ultimately have to take a call. Okay, so this is how your optional exemption can be availed. It inflates my lease asset, it inflates my lease liability, but that is acceptable. We then move one step further. And look at these non-lease components again. I will take the same case, but I will slightly modify it. Okay, Lease agreement, standalone. Property was how much? Okay, property lease component furniture and fixtures lease component, and in your lease agreement you are also going to collect the insurance. You are also going to collect the insurance. Now forget maintenance, this is insurance. Okay, 7 lakhs. All right. Now please pay attention, understand this. Okay, in the case of maintenance, the lessee was getting benefit of this maintenance that he was paying. Okay, he was paying for the property, for the furniture, fixture, for the maintenance. He was getting a benefit, and therefore without the optional exemption it was okay to allocate this 60,000 also to maintenance and charge it off to my profit and loss account, because I was getting the benefit of that. The reporting entity, the lessee entity, was getting the benefit of this expenditure. Now, suppose the lessor has taken this property, and for protecting this property, for safeguarding this property, he has taken an insurance. Now this insurance is a sizable amount. Okay, is a sizable amount, and this lessor collects an amount from the lessee towards that insurance. The lessor collects an amount from the lessee towards that insurance. Now the question arises, will this insurance give any benefit? Will this insurance give any benefit to the lessee? So you answer this question to me. Will it benefit the lessee? Will it benefit the lessee? Yes or no? Give me the answer. Okay, give me the answer to this. Okay, will this insurance benefit the lessee? Not any, no such benefit. Anybody else? Do you think this insurance of property will benefit the lessee? Others, Srinidhi, Vidula, Jay, Priya, Garg, Nitin, Mahinder. What do you guys think? Will it benefit the lessee? आप इंश्योरेंस के लिए भी पैसे रिकवर कर रहे हो. Insurance will give benefit to the lessee. Srinidhi, understand first. Who is owning this property? Lessor. Lessor has taken an insurance for this property, and he is recovering some of that insurance, a portion of that insurance from the lessee. Think and answer. Is the lessee going to get a benefit of this insurance or not? Okay, I hope you have understood the query. Now you answer. Correct. Sheena is saying no, because it is owned by the lessor. Priya Garg is also saying there is not going to be any benefit to the lessee, which is absolutely right. अरे कल को आपके प्रॉपर्टी में आग लग गई. You get fire in your property catches fire. You are staying, lessee is staying in that property. The property catches fire. Who is going to make the claim for the property? The lessor is going to make the claim. Who will get the insurance claim sum assured? It is the lessor who is going to get the claim for the sum assured. And therefore, who is getting the benefit of this insurance? It is the lessor who is getting the benefit. Lessee को कोई benefit नहीं है. There is no benefit that accrues to the lessee in this regard. Okay. Let us move to another case. Towards property tax. Now, this property tax should be borne by whom? It should be borne by the owner of the property. The owner of the property. And the owner of the property Once he pays the house tax, it means he will have his whatever facilities from the municipality will come, like the water connection, electricity connection. All those things will continue to be recognized because he has paid his property taxes. Otherwise, if you do not pay the property taxes, they will come behind you. Okay. So this is a benefit that goes to the lesser. This is the benefit that goes to the lesser. The lesser is going to get the benefit of the property tax that he is paying. The municipality will come collect the garbage from the building, which is something which even the lesser's apartment dumps. So that is a benefit municipality gives him because he's paying the property tax. So it is the benefit of the lesser, not the lessee, not the lessee. It is just a recovery of the property tax that is being paid. Whereas contrast it with maintenance. Contrast it with maintenance. Maintenance mein, was the lessee getting benefit? Yes, he was. The lessee was getting the benefit in the sense that he could use the clubhouse, he could use the swimming pool, he could go to the basketball court or the tennis court and play tennis. He could use the walking track. He could use the banquet hall at a subsidized price. All these benefits are being enjoyed by the lessee in the case of maintenance. Whereas in the case of insurance or property tax or something like administrative charges, there is no benefit that accrues to the lessee. If there is no benefit that accrues to the lessee, then what do you have to do? Then you will not allocate anything to this. You will not allocate anything to the insurance, property tax, admin charges when you do the split between the lease and the non-lease component. Right? I'm not availing the exemption here. See, be careful. In this case, I availed the exemption in spite of getting benefit from the maintenance expense. Whereas in this case, I'm not getting a benefit. अरे वो मेरा खर्चा ही नहीं है, मुझे उससे कुछ फायदा ही नहीं होने वाला है. I am not getting any benefit if I pay insurance for the lesser. I am not getting any benefit if I pay the property tax portion to the lesser. I am not getting any benefit if I pay the administrative charges of the society to the lesser. वो सब उसका खर्चा है. He is getting benefit. I am just contributing it because I want this property. Okay. So I'm okay to pay that to him, but it's not my benefit, truly speaking. And when it is not by benefit, how can I recognize the cost in the P&L? How can I recognize the cost of such an expense in the P&L जब मेरे को कोई benefit नहीं मिल रहा है? Your cost can be recognized if you get a benefit. But when there is no benefit, I should not recognize that cost in the P&L, and therefore I will not allocate anything. I will not allocate anything to the insurance and property tax. I will directly take it to the furniture and fixtures and property ROU assets. I am willingly paying this for the insurance, property tax, etc. because I know that the worth of this property is there. The value is there for me to stay in it. My value is coming from property and furniture fixtures. So whatever extra I'm paying for this insurance, etc., it is better if I allocate it to property and furniture fixtures and not separately to insurance, because it's not giving me a benefit. So when we talk about a non-lease component, you have to look at two things. First one, is the non-lease component going to give me a benefit? Yes. If yes, you will allocate a part of the lease consideration to that non-lease component, depending on standalone prices or fair value or whatever it is. Okay. Or the residual value also ultimately. Okay. If I do not get any benefit from such a component, I will not allocate anything to that component. If the non-lease component gives me a benefit, I can also avail the optional exemption of not allocating anything to the non-lease component, instead allocating the entire amount to the lease component. Is it okay? So these are two different things. The first case, the non-lease component with a benefit, you are availing optional exemption means what? It means that you are ultimately going for a cost benefit analysis kind of a situation, and you prefer to give a fair view but keeping the cost in mind, and therefore you avail that exemption. Whereas in the second case, it's not an exemption that you are availing, it is a principle. It is a matter of principle. It's not your benefit, it cannot be your cost. You are agreeing to pay for these amounts because you find that higher benefit is there in property, higher benefit is there in the attached furniture fixtures, and therefore you will allocate entire 7 lakhs to property and F&F and nothing to furniture, to insurance, property tax, admin charges, etc. Is it understood? Yes, sure. Are we clear with split separation between lease components, non-lease components? Non-lease components giving a benefit, non-lease components not giving a benefit. I hope you guys are clear with that. Yes. Just give me a thumbs up, everyone. Anybody has any doubts, please ask. Clear, sir. Ayush has confirmed. Lessor is safeguarding himself, Sunny, so no benefit to the lessee. That is right. Okay. Yes, Sheena, Priya, Srinidhi, Vidula, Ayush has confirmed, Mahinder. सब ठीक है, सब समझ में आ गया? Yes, ठीक है, Mahinder ने भी confirm कर दिया. All right, so this takes care of separation between lease and non-lease components. We now just look at the theory in this regard. Okay, it is possible that a single lease contract may have lease and non-lease components. हो सकता है. Property with maintenance, renting a cab with a driver. Okay, example, lease of flat with maintenance facilities or water and electricity charges, or lease of car with the chauffeur services. Such agreements are in substance two things. One is a lease contract, the other is purchase of goods or services. So you need to do a separation between the lease and non-lease components. What is the separation doing? The lease component will be accounted as per 116. The non-lease component will be accounted for based on respective Ind AS, or if no Ind AS is applicable, in accordance with GAAP, which involves generally expensing to the P&L. Okay, yahi hoga. Most of the cases it goes straight away to the P&L. Optional exemption of using a practical expedient is provided. मतलब practically आपके पास option दिया जाता है कि भाई आप non-lease component को split मत करो, उसको lease component के साथ जुड़े रहने दो. Okay, so it has to be an accounting policy choice. Choose not to separate the non-lease and the lease components, in which case entire contract consideration would be allocated. And I have put this for you क्योंकि कल को आप उठ के बोलोगे सर ने ऐसा कहा था लेकिन इसमें तो inflate हो रहा है. The lease components would, strictly speaking, be overstated, but that is a small price we are paying for the benefit that we are going to get. Okay. Important aspect, only those lease components which provide benefit to the lessee are to be considered for the above purposes. Matlab benefit is there, only then you do the splitting. Where components such as property tax, insurance, administrative charges, etc. are included in the lease contract which do not provide any benefit to the lessee, the contracted amounts would be included in the overall contract consideration. Allocation to the lease components or lease and non-lease components, depending on the practical expedient availed by the entity, would be made on the standalone prices or fair value of the lease and non-lease components. Okay, so that takes care of separation of lease and non-lease components. Yes, if you opt for exemption, obviously you will have to disclose it. Okay, if you opt for exemption, you will have to disclose it. Okay, as an accounting policy in the financial statements. Absolutely right. Okay, whatever you do, you disclose. Whatever you do, you disclose. Oh my God. Okay. All right. Is it clear, guys? Yes, everyone. So separation of lease and non-lease components is done. We now come to examples. We now come to your institute study material. Okay. All right. Illustration number 12. Scenario A. A lessee enters into a lease of an excavator and the related accessories. For example, excavator attachments. Okay, you know that JCB or earth moving equipments which are there. The earth moving equipment, on one side it has a hand like structure, okay, to pull out the mud, and on the other side as a wide structure is attached. There is a wide attachment that is meant for taking the mud and pushing it, and pressing it against the boundary walls. Okay, so you are having two attachments on either side. One side hand like thing to wide wala. Okay, so you are having excavator and those related accessories that are used for mining purposes. Okay, okay, can the exemption once adopted be changed in the next year? It will be on a lease by lease basis. Okay, Sheena. So you decide these exemptions at the commencement of the lease agreement. Uske baad, at least for that lease, you cannot modify it. You can modify it later on. Okay, so the exemption once adopted cannot be changed in the next year. Okay. But for another lease, you can choose not to avail that exemption. Okay, so that is how it will flow. All right. The lessee is a local mining company that intends to use the excavator at a copper mine. Okay, so local mining company, normally how these companies work is they have the mines, etc., but they take these vehicles on lease. So how many lease and non-lease components are there? How many lease and non-lease components are there? Just think about scenario A and give me the answer. Think about scenario A and give me the answer. Don't look at your study material. Okay, please don't look at the answers. Scenario A. How many lease components are there? You have lease of the excavator with the related accessories that are used for mining. How many lease and non-lease components are there? There is only one because of the high interdependency. Absolutely right. Okay. The excavator is a vehicle. Without attachments, there is no sense to that excavator. Okay, वो किसी काम का नहीं है. वो, you see the excavators that go on the road without attachments. It is just a vehicle like any other vehicle. Okay, थोड़ा गाली ज़्यादा खाएगा because it is blocking everybody's way. But apart from that, it's nothing. Okay, so excavator का अपने आप में value नहीं रहता. Excavator का value तब आता है when you have those attachments added to that. सिर्फ attachments का value है नहीं. Attachment हम कैसे उठाएंगे? हम तो उठा भी नहीं सकते. You need that vehicle to take the load of that attachments, and then excavate the resources from the mines. So therefore both of them are highly interdependent on each other, and therefore separation is not at all possible. Okay, so therefore it is a single lease component. Okay, so in scenario A, it is a single lease component. Single lease component. Okay. All right. Next one is, assume the same facts as in scenario A, except that the contract also conveys the right to use an additional loading truck. Matlab, now you are having excavator, accessories plus the loading truck. This loading truck could be deployed by the lessee for other uses. For example, transport iron ores at another mine. So now tell me, in scenario B, I have three items, that is excavator, accessories, and the truck. Now how many components are there? Now how many components are there? This B, excavator including accessories and loading truck. Loading truck. Two components, but yes, so Priya is right, Vidula is right, Ayush is also right. Two components are there. First one is excavator with its accessories. The second one is the loading truck. Both of them are identified assets. Right to control use exists with the lessee, so both of them will become lease components. Okay. We then move on to illustration 13. Entity L rents an office building from landlord M for a term of 10 years. Okay. So you have a building. The rental contract stipulates that the office is fully furnished. So office furniture, and has a newly installed and tailored HVAC system, air conditioning centralized system. It also requires landlord M to perform all common area maintenance during the term of the arrangement. Entity L makes a single monthly rental payment and does not pay for the maintenance separately. So there is a maintenance component also. Separately, he does not pay means it is included in the lease payment. The office building has a useful life of 40 years. The HVAC system and office furniture each has a life of 15 years. What are the units of account in the lease? Units of account means kitne components hai. How many components are there? Are there 4 components, 3 components, 2 components, or the entire is 1 component? क्या लगता है अपने को? What do we think? How many components? 3, 4, 2, 1, 0. 1, the lease component of the building. So Sheena has said there is 1 component, that is the building as a whole. Okay. Next one. Any other answers? Ayush is saying there are 3 components. Any other answers? Vidula is saying there is 1 component, that is building, but I think she has numbered it as 1 building. Okay. Any other? 2 lease components, Priya Garg. that is the office building with HVAC and the furniture, and one non-lease component, that is the maintenance expense. Okay, so that is right. Those of you who have answered one lease component, it appears that there is one lease component, but when we do the assessment, normally it goes something like this: the building and the tailored HVAC system, building plus HVAC together, it is integrated, highly interdependent, highly interrelated. So this becomes one component. And this is a lease component because it is an identified asset, right to control use exists. Okay. Okay. The next one is office furniture. This is also a lease component. Why? Because it's an identified asset. I have a right to control the use. So therefore, this is a second component. Okay. Sheena Jain is now putting in the answer. Srinidhi has said building with, and last one is maintenance. Last one is maintenance. Maintenance may, does the lessee get the benefit? Yes, he gets the benefit. But is it an asset? Do I see an asset for maintenance? No, there is not. There is no benefit. Okay, so there is no identified asset. So one non-lease component. So total I am having three components, as Priya Garg also rightly mentioned, and as Sheena has added later on. Srinidhi has said. Vidula, hope you understood better. Okay, that we are having three components. Building plus HVAC together is taken as one because of the high degree of interrelationship or interdependence. The next one is the office furniture, and the third one is your maintenance expenses. Okay, non-lease component. That's right. Okay, so most of you are getting the hang of it. Okay, all right. Let us then move on to illustration 15. A lessee enters into a lease of an equipment. Okay. The contract stipulates that the lessor will perform maintenance of the leased equipment and received consideration for that maintenance service. So lease hai, maintenance hai, two things are there. The contract includes the following fixed prices for the lease and non-lease component. So this is the contract price. Okay, so a lease and maintenance. As per the contract, what is the price? The lease is at 80,000. The maintenance is at 10,000. So the total is 90,000. Assume the standalone prices cannot be readily observed. So the lessee makes estimates, maximizing the use of observable information of the lease and non-lease components as follows. So you are given the fair values. What is the fair value? The lease fair value is 85,000. The maintenance fair value is 15,000. This total comes to 1 lakh. This total comes to 1 lakh. And now you will have to, assuming that the lessee has not opted the practical expedient, how will the lessee allocate the consideration to lease and non-lease component? Achha, suppose in the examination they had asked the question without mentioning this line. Without mentioning this line. Okay. They just had to mention how will the lessee allocate the consideration to lease and non-lease component. You have to give answer from both the perspectives. Okay, don't just give the answer from the perspective that practical expedient is not adopted and therefore you will do the allocation on the basis of the fair values. Don't just give one answer because that will be half answer. If this line is not given, you will also have to give the alternative answer, that alternatively, if the practical expedient was adopted, then the component value will go entirely to the lease component. Okay, and nothing will be allocated to the maintenance. You have to give both the options, okay, to be safe. All right. So now when this is your allocation, forget that 80 and 90. Now, all that you have to do is this 90,000, you will split it in the ratio of 85 and 15. So 90,000 into 85 by 100, that gives you 76,500. And the other one is 10,000 into 15 by 100. Sorry, 90,000 into 15 by 100. So that gives you, that's right, 13,500. 13,500. Okay. You will not consider this split. This split is irrelevant for reporting. That is not a split which you will consider. That is not a split which you will consider for your financial reporting. Okay, you will consider the split of 76,500 and 13,500. Basically 90,000 in the ratio of 85:15. That's right. That's right, Sheena Jain. Absolutely right. All right. So that takes care of illustration 15. Let us move on to illustration 14. Okay. Scenario A. A lessee enters into a 5-year lease of equipment with fixed annual payments of 10,000. The contract contains fixed annual payments as follows: 8,000 for rent, 1,500 for maintenance, and 500 for administrative tasks. Okay, so this is the contracted payments. Contracted payments के हिसाब से I am having a lease, that is the lease, then you have the maintenance, and then you have the administrative tasks. So lease component, non-lease component, 10,000. This is 8,500. This is 1,000, and this is 500. Sorry, this is 1,500. My bad. And this is 8,000. Yes, 8,000, 1,500 and 500. Okay. Agreement price is just relevant for apportionment. Ratio nahi baba, ratio is fair value or standalone price. Okay. What you have to look is the total agreement value. That is the only price which is relevant. Okay. Baki jo uske andar ka breakup diya rehta hai, that has no meaning in the agreement. Okay. That is just something that you are entering into an arrangement. Okay. So this is the contracted price. Tell me one thing, admin charges, are they going to be, are they a non-lease component, or they are not even a non-lease component? What do you think? Moral of the story, Sheena is saying the lessee is going to pay how much in the previous question? He will pay 90,000. He is going to pay 90,000. Okay, not 80. Sheena Jain, he will pay 90. You have written 80, it is 90. Okay, just confirm. The lessee will pay 90. Okay. Because contract includes the prices for lease and non-lease component. So total 90 ka payment jayega, not 80. Okay. Admin is not even a non-lease component. That's absolutely right. So nothing should be allocated to the admin component. Any allocation that will be done will be between the lease and the maintenance. And if you take even the practical expedient of not allocating the non-lease item, then entire 10,000 will go and sit in your lease component. Okay. So if I have to give this, how the consideration would be allocated, then enters into a 5-year lease of equipment, Now this 5-year lease means 10,000 into 5. Get present value. Right now, you are going to make payments of 50,000. This 50,000 will be allocated between the lease as well as the maintenance. So your lease means basically the ROU asset. Yes, this 8,000 and 1,500 is the contracted price. This is nothing's given. This is not even the fair value. See, practically I'm talking, not even the fair value or the standalone price. However, academically हमें ना तो fair value पता है, ना तो standalone price पता. I do not know the fair value. I do not know the standalone price. Nothing is given. So therefore, for academic purposes only, I will allocate this 10,000 in the ratio of 8,000 and 1,500. That's it. Okay. So the split is 8,000. And 1,500. So you will allocate 10,000 as 8,000 and 1,500. This is academic. Okay. Otherwise, I cannot take this to be the fair values. Okay. But ठीक है, अभी और कोई values नहीं है. That is why I am taking. Okay. So 10,000 divided by 9,500. So 8,421. 1,579. 1,579. This is how you will do the allocation, assuming that 8,000 and 1,500 themselves are the fair values. Okay, you will split it in this ratio. If you take the practical expedient also, then entire 10,000 will be allocated to the lease. Is everybody there? Yes. Admin task non-lease component. Srinidhi is right. Sheena Jain is right. Ayush is right. Bas everybody is right. Bas sab 100 on 100 lekar aa jao exam mein. You will get it. Absolutely right. Okay. Acha, if standalone prices are given, fair values are given, then you will ignore this. Standalone prices are given, fair values are given, you will ignore this breakup and take those standalone fair values. Okay, next one. Assuming the fact pattern as in scenario A is the same, except that in addition, the contract requires the lessee to pay for restoration of the equipment to its original condition. How this consideration would be allocated? Okay. Have you guys studied Ind AS 16? Yes. You guys have studied Ind AS 16 recently, I guess. Okay. So therefore, now see, there is the lessor, there is the lessee. The lessor gives the property on lease to the lessee. Lessee will do some structural alterations. He'll put in some wall, remove some pillars, do something to suit his use. Lessor is fine with that. Lessor is only telling the lessee, look, तुम्हें जो करना है करो, जो तोड़ना है तोड़ो, जो बनाना है बनाओ. लीज टर्म खत्म होने के बाद मैंने जैसे तुम्हें ये प्रॉपर्टी दिया था, मुझे उसी कंडीशन में चाहिए, वही पेंटिंग, वही स्ट्रक्चर्स, वही जो कुछ भी तुमने तोड़ा है वो वापस बना दो, जो कुछ भी तुमने बनाया उसे तोड़ दो. What you have made you break, what you have broken you make it again. So therefore मेरे को मेरा प्रॉपर्टी जैसा मैंने दिया था वैसा चाहिए. आई वॉन्ट माई प्रॉपर्टी बैक इन द सेम वे आई गेव इट टू यू. लेसी अग्रीज टू दैट. सो नाउ द लेसी is going to pay what? The lessee is going to pay to the lessor the lease considerations plus वो क्या है? Maintenance plus the other thing is administrative. Okay, this is as per the agreement. Okay, together this is 10,000 for 5 years. Okay, this is what the lessee will pay to the lessor. At the end of 5 years, the lessee has to restore it. This fact is known on the first day of entering into the lease agreement. वो बाद में पता नहीं चलता. It's known right on the day when you are entering. Okay, so the moment you step into that unit and you make some structural alteration, जैसे ही आपने structural alteration किया, आपने पिलर खड़ा किया, आपने एक दीवार बनाया, you have made a wall, you have broken a wall, you have balcony hai, the balcony you brought it inside to make the space wider. The moment you do such a thing, there is an obligation upon you. This obligation is to restore the property. Now, why do you say that it is an obligation? Because the moment you do something which creates a liability upon you, in layman's terms I'm talking, the moment you do something which creates a liability upon you, there is no alternative to avoid that liability. You have to settle that liability. In this case, the moment you make a structural alteration, you have invited the liability on yourself, the obligation on yourself that I have to break this after 5 years and restore it. मेरे को ये करना ही करना है. It is a point of no return. मतलब you make it, you cannot evade that liability, you cannot evade that restoration, and therefore you are having what we call as a site restoration obligation. Okay, you are having a site restoration obligation, and this site restoration obligation, will I pay it to the lessor? Answer is no, you will not. You will pay it to some third party. Do I know to whom I have to pay it on the first day of the lease? No, you do not. You may not even know till the 5th year कि whom am I going to appoint, मैं किस contractor को बुलाऊंगा ये structural alterations change करके पहले जैसा बनाने के लिए. I do not know that. I do not know which contractor I will appoint to make the building like how it was when I first took it on lease. I do not know. In spite of that, Ind AS 37 tells us you will have to make a provision. And when you read it with Ind AS 16, this site restoration provision has to be capitalized in the cost of the asset. The site restoration provision has to be capitalized in the property, plant and equipment. We bring forward the same concept in Ind AS 116. You have recognized an ROU asset. To this ROU asset, you will add the site restoration provision. Sir, will I add the value at the end of 5 years? No, you will obviously discount it to present value. And whatever is the present value of that provision, you will add it to the site, to the ROU asset. But is it going to be paid to the lessor? Answer is no, it will not. And therefore, if that is the case, what they have asked, the treatment is How the consideration will be allocated? Arey Baba, the lease consideration is 10,000 only. That allocation remains the same. Site restoration is an additional cost that you will incur, which has to be capitalized in the ROU asset. In the ROU asset. Okay. You will not. It is a non-lease component. Okay. वो तो fixed है. But the thing is, it's not between the lessor and lessee in the first place. See, when I spoke about a non-lease component, or when I even spoke about payments which are neither lease nor non-lease components, jahan pe the lessee is not getting any benefit, the transaction flow was between the lessor and lessee. In the case of site restoration, it is between lessee and some third party who will do the breaking for me, who will do the construction for me after 5 years. So this is not even a transaction between lessor and lessee. So lessor and lessee ke case mein, it is the same allocation of 10,000 that will be done. The site restoration obligation, what are you going to do? Capitalize in ROU asset. You will capitalize this in ROU asset, and you will depreciate it over the lease term. You will depreciate it over the lease term. Have you understood? Yes, it's not a transaction between lessor and lessee. So wo aayega hi nahi. Okay, it won't come under 116. All right. Have you understood? अरे समझ में आ गया अपने को? गर्ल्स, शीना, श्रीनिधि, विदुला, महेंद्र, बॉयज. So there won't be any change. 10,000 will be allocated the way we did the allocation. That's it. All right. Capitalize in the ROU asset. All right. Let us then move further. Okay. All right. This is taken from your test your knowledge section. We'll just do these two questions and then take a break. Okay. Because that completes this separation of lease and non-lease component. Okay. Question 4. A lessee enters into a 10-year lease contract to use an equipment. Okay. The contract also includes maintenance services as provided by lessor. Lessor obtains its own insurance for the equipment. Annual payments are 10,000. 1,000 relate to maintenance services and 500 to insurance cost. The lessee is able to determine that similar maintenance services and insurance costs are offered by third parties for 2,000 and 500 rupees a year respectively. The lessee is unable to find an observable standalone rental amount for a similar equipment because none is leased without the related maintenance services provided by the lessor. How would the lessee allocate the consideration? Okay. Ayush, I will explain that part. Okay. I will explain that part to you. Okay. How would the lessee allocate the consideration to the lease component? Okay. So contract, what does the contract say? I am having for the equipment lease, for the what you can say maintenance services and for the insurance. How much are you paying for the maintenance services? 1,000. For the insurance, 500. Total payment that you are making is 10,000. So your equipment comes in at 8,500. Okay, so this is the breakup as per the contract. The lessee is able to determine that now this is standalone prices. Similar maintenance services price is 2,000 and insurance prices 500 a year respectively. Insurance cost offered by third parties for 2,000 and 500 a year respectively. The lessee is unable to find an observable standalone rental amount for a similar equipment because none is leased without the related maintenance services provided by the lessor. Okay, so the lessee is unable to find. Matlab, this standalone price is not available. This standalone price is not available. So how would the lessee allocate the consideration? What is the total consideration? 10,000. It is asking, how will you allocate it to the lease component? Equipment is the lease component here. Maintenance is the non-lease component. Insurance, though, it is just a expense without any benefit to the lessee. So now you will follow the residual approach. Abhi, this is irrelevant for me. Insurance ka whatever split breakup is there, this is of no relevance. Why? Because it is neither a lease nor a non-lease component. It is just some payment which we are making towards an item for which we are not even getting the benefit. So ye nahi hoga. Standalone price of the equipment lease is not available. So therefore, total contract price is 10,000. 2,000 is the standalone price for maintenance, and therefore follow the residual approach and take 8,000 as equipment lease. Equipment lease. Is it okay? Yes, we are following the residual approach. Sheena Jain is right. Absolutely right. No doubt. Okay, no doubt. Mahinder Kumar bhi theek hai. Srinidhi, hope you understood. Tanushri, hope you understood. Yes. Acha. Ayush has asked a question in this site restoration that, sir, if we capitalize site restoration obligation, it means we are deriving benefit from it. Answer is no, it's not. See, understand one thing. Site restoration obligation means what? I have to improve that. I have to improve that, or what you say, I have to restore that site the way it was when I took it on lease. That means after the lease term, that is after 5 years, you are going to get a hit of the restoration cost. You are going to be hit by the restoration cost after 5 years. Okay. But look at the true and fair view. This provision existed on which day? Did it arise suddenly at the end of 5th year? No, sir, it did not. It arose right in the 1st year itself when I made structural alterations. That means when you made the alterations, you had to recognize the provision in your books of accounts. But the earlier ASs also did not recognize this concept of site restoration. They would take a huge hit in the last year when the expenditure was incurred, though the provision existed right from the first day when they entered into the contract. So in this case also, you've entered into the contract. It is a provision that existed right from day one of the contract. You have not recorded it. So now under the Ind AS 37, this site restoration obligation provision needs to be recognized. So credit goes to provision for site restoration. Debit kisko jayega? In the first year, debit will go to what? Debit will go to P&L. Answer is no. It cannot, because it's not yet my expense for the first year. Neither is it my expense for the second, third, fourth year. Okay. It is a 5-year expense and I want a smoothening of profits. So where will I take it? I will take it straight away to my, what you can say, I will take it straight away to my ROU asset. It does not mean I'm getting benefit. I am taking it to ROU asset because ROU asset will be depreciated over 5 years. And that means the site restoration cost, which is included in ROU asset now, will also be expensed over a 5-year term. And therefore, that is not getting benefit. It is rather apportionment of expense over a 5-year tenure. It is apportionment of expense over a 5-year tenure. We are looking at substance over form. This site restoration obligation has not arisen in the last year. It has arisen in the first year itself. And because it arose in the first year, we have to book the provision. But we cannot take it to the P&L of the first year because it is a build-up of expenditure. It is a build-up of expenditure over 5 years. Therefore, what best we do is we capitalize in the cost of the asset, which will be depreciated over a period of 5 years, which will be depreciated over a period of 5 years. I hope that answers your query, Ayush. Okay, so then let us move on to the last question of this part. This is asked in your November 2020 RTP. Yes, entity X enters into a lease agreement with entity Y to lease an entire floor of a shopping mall for a period of 9 years. The annual lease rent of 70,000 is payable at the end of the year. To carry out its operation smoothly, X simultaneously enters into another agreement with entity Y, which is a facilities agreement for using certain other facilities owned by entity Y, such as passenger lift, DG sets, power supply infrastructure, parking space, etc., which are specifically mentioned in the agreement for annual service charges amounting to rupees 1 lakh. As per the agreement, the ownership of the facilities shall remain with entity Y. Lessee's incremental borrowing rate is 10%. The facilities agreement clearly specifies that it shall be coexistent and coterminous with the lease agreement. Matlab, whenever your lease agreement gets due for renewal, that time the facilities agreement also will get due for renewal. Okay, so they are going to go together. The facility agreement shall stand terminated automatically on termination or expiry of the lease agreement. Entity X has assessed, that is the lessee, has assessed that the standalone price of the lease agreement is 1,20,000. Standalone price of facilities agreement is 80,000. Okay. So contract price for lease, and the other one is facilities. The other one is facilities. So this is 70,000. Facilities is like maintenance, what we discussed. So this total is 1,70,000. This total is 1,70,000. Whereas the standalone prices has assessed that the standalone price of lease agreement is 1,20,000. And standalone prices of the facilities arrangement is 80,000. So this comes to 2 lakh rupees. This comes to 2 lakh rupees. How are you going to split 1,70,000? Sir, split is given, no, 70,000 and 1 lakh. Apne ko wapas se kyun split karna? Are baba, that split is the split given in the contract, which is irrelevant for the purposes of accounting. Accounting ke liye to my split is going to be 1,70,000 in the ratio of 12:8. In the ratio of 12:8. Okay, so that comes to, when I do the split, this goes off. I will split 1,70,000 in this ratio, 1,02,000, and that leaves you with 68,000. 68,000 is a facilities service, so that will go straight to the P&L. That will not be recognized as an ROU asset. 68,000, you take it straight to the P&L. That's right, Ayush. So what will I do with 1,02,000? How will entity X? Entity X has not decided to apply the practical expedient in para 15 of not to separate the non-lease from lease components, and accordingly it separates the non-lease component from the lease component. How will entity X account for the lease liability? So suppose the PVAF is given to you of 9. sorry, 10%, 10% for 9 years. If you look at 10% for 9 years, it is given to you to be 5.758. Lease, non-lease component is there, no? Use of facilities. वो क्या, वो मेंटेनेंस जैसा ही तो है. लिफ्ट है, पार्किंग स्पेस है, पावर सप्लाई इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, डीजी सेट्स है. ऑल दीज आर giving benefit to the lessee, but they are not identified assets. They are not identified assets, and therefore you will have to recognize on standalone basis and expense it out. So this is a lease component. This is a non-lease component. The facilities are a non-lease component. Okay. So I will do the split 1,20,000 and 80,000. So 1,20,000, not 1,20,000, sorry. What am I saying? 1,02,000 into 5.758. $5,87,316. I will recognize an ROU asset and a lease liability. This is what I will record. Okay. 5,87,316. We'll do the discount rate, kya hona hai, kaise hona hai, all those things we will do. But as of now, this is sufficient for you to understand. Is it fine, everyone? Yes. Ayush, that facilities agreement is a non-lease component. Okay. So I hope you understood. I hope your query on site restoration also got resolved. Yes. Okay. So with that, we take a 10-minute break. We shall resume at 9:20. Please post your queries, everyone. And if everyone has understood so far, please post that also. So after the session, I can take a call whether we can discuss this or we can proceed further. Okay. We'll take a call. All right. Fine. So Nisarg. Okay. All right. So welcome back. Thank you for confirming, Srinidhi, Priya, Tanushri, Ayush, Mahinder. All well. So now we shall proceed. That takes care of your separation between lease components, separation between lease and non-lease components, and initial discussions about what is a lease exactly. Okay. So now we slowly start moving towards the more nuanced parts of the standard, where we now actually, you start to see things which are familiar with our journal entries. Okay. Like what should be the date, and then after the date, what should be the lease term, what should be the lease payment, and what do you mean by initial direct cost and guaranteed residual value or residual value guarantee. Okay, what you call. Okay, so these are some 5 to 6 terms which are extremely important. Out of this also, 2 terms, that is lease payment and lease terms, are very important to understand. So let us now jump into these concepts and then we shall proceed further. Okay. So you have two terms. One is the inception date and the other is the commencement date. Okay. If you look at just the English meaning of inception and commencement, both mean the same thing. But for the purpose of your Ind AS 116, they are quite different. Okay. When you talk about inception date, it is earlier of date of lease agreement or date of commitment by the parties. Date of commitment by the parties to the contract, to the principal terms. Okay. So this is what is going to be your inception date. So lease agreement means what? The date when you sign it. Okay. And the date of commitment means what? The date when you have actually arrived at a consensus. Okay, so consensus is built on which date? Okay, when you have an understanding of each other's terms. Okay, so that date is the date of commitment. It is on this date that the entity assesses whether a contract is or contains a lease or not. Okay, so it is on this date when an entity assesses whether the contract contains a lease or not, or whether a contract is a lease or not. Okay, for example, the date of commitment to the principal, 1st April 2021, commitment to the, ये क्या लिखा, commitment to the principal नहीं, to the terms. I'll modify this. Commitment to the terms is 1st April 2021. You have actually signed the lease agreement on 15th June. Doesn't matter. The inception date is going to be 1st April because that was the date when you agreed the terms. Okay. Later on, you have just delayed the signing of the lease agreement, but nevertheless, 1st April will be the inception date. Okay. On 1st April, you know that the contract is a lease or contains a lease. Okay. Commencement date means what? This refers to the date when the underlying asset is made available for use to the lessee. When this asset becomes available for use. That means your inception date, on that date, no journal entry is going to be passed because you just agreed the terms. There is no transaction that has taken place. So on the inception date, no impact will come on the in the books. The impact will come in the books from the commencement date onwards because that is the date when the asset is made available for use to the lessee. Matlab, it is on this date that the lessee gets the right of use over that asset. So the accounting for the ROU asset or the lease liability will start from this date. So ROU asset and lease liability, both of them will start from the commencement date. So if we continue the above example, you've made the asset available for use on 1st July. You have made your lease payments, they start from 1st August. what are you going to take? Will you take 1st July as the lease commencement date, or will you take 1st August? It is going to be 1st of July. The date of lease payment is not relevant for the initial recognition of ROU asset or lease liability. That means, what do you mean by date of lease payment? By late date of lease payment is just settlement of a liability. Ultimately, when you talk about lease arrangements in the books of the lessee under Ind AS 116, you are having an ROU asset on one side, you are having a lease liability on the other side. Lease payment is just nothing but the discharge of the lease liability. The lease payment is typically nothing but discharging the lease liability. So that is a subsequent step. Okay. What is important is, on which date are you going to recognize the lease liability? That date becomes the commencement date. And what will be the commencement date? When I get the right to use the asset. So the ROU asset to lease liability, that will be passed on the date when the asset is made available for use to the lessee. Okay, so these two terms are very simple. We then move on to the most important term. Two terms, these remaining two terms are very important. One is lease term, which we are now discussing, and the other is lease payments. Okay, so let us come on to lease term. अच्छा सर, व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय लीज टर्म? अरे सर, उसमें क्या है, लीज टर्म तो वही हो गया ना जो अग्रीमेंट में लिखा रहता है, हम लोग लीज देंगे 5 साल के लिए, हम लोग लीज देंगे 10 साल के लिए, हम लोग लीज देंगे 2 साल के लिए. हाँ, सो दैट इज वन पार्ट ऑफ द लीज टर्म. ओके, सो दिस इज द नॉन कैंसलेबल पीरियड specified in the lease agreement. Specified in the lease agreement. This is going to be there. Okay, this is going to be there. ROU asset means right of use asset. Subhash. Okay, Subhash. All right, ROU asset is nothing but a right of use asset. Okay, so we will see the accounting of that as it happens. Okay, so the non cancelable period तो होगा ना सर, but इतना आसान नहीं होता. लीज टर्म जो है ना, it's not so simple. If you look at lease agreements, there could be agreements where renewal option at the end of 5 years could be there. Yes, there could be a renewal option. Now, the renewal option could be at the option of the lessee. The renewal option could be at the option of the lessor, or it could be at the option of both lessee and lessor. दोनों डिसाइड करेंगे कि मेरा लीज रिन्यू होगा या नहीं होगा. So in this case, what is going to be my lease agreement? So suppose this agreement that we are discussing, the non-cancelable term is 5 years and the renewal option is another 5 years. So now what is going to be my lease term? Will it be 5 years? Will it be 5 plus 5, 10 years? Hoga kya? We have to debate on that. Second one. Okay, now we will discuss this only, and then with some examples I can take it. Suppose you have an agreement. Where the lease term is for 5 years plus 5 years renewal at option of lessee. मतलब लेसी डिसाइड करेगा उसको रिन्यू करना है या नहीं करना है. So now when I talk about Ind AS 116, this is primarily from the perspective of the lessee. Lessee के perspective से सोचो. If you think from perspective of lessee has a renewal option. So then what are you going to consider? Lessee is the reporting entity. So what are you going to consider? First one, consider significant economic benefits available to lessee in case renewal option is exercised. In case renewal option is exercised. तो लेसी खुद सोचेगा ना बैठ के, the lessee alone will think, the reporting entity will think, अच्छा, I have a 5-year renewal option. It's an option for me, it's not mandatory. So the management of the lessee will think, okay, so if I exercise this option, what will be the consequences, or what will be, whether I have any economic benefits or not. So now, what are the economic benefits? For example, first one, the lease rent charged in renewal period is going to be far less than the fair value rent. Is going to be far less than the fair value rent. Yes or no? Array, see, when you have taken a property on lease for 5 years and the lessor promises you that, look, whatever be the lease rent after 5 years, I will give you an option to renew, and if you renew, I will charge only 50% of the market value of the lease rent. Is that a benefit for you? Definitely it is a benefit for you. And therefore, that becomes a significant economic benefit that you will have to consider when you are going to decide whether the renewal option will be exercised by you, that is the lessee reporting entity, or not. The next one is, suppose you are an entity like, let us assume a movie theater, for example, PVR. Okay, now PVR has these cineplexes or multiplexes in various malls. Okay, malls ke andar rehta hai. So typically they take it on a lease. And when you have these cineplexes or multiplexes, PVR will do a lot of structural modification. The area dedicated to PVR, they will put in those canvas drapes where you project the movie. They will have a separate room to keep the movie projector. They will put in furniture and fixtures in the form of those sitting arrangements. They will put a canteen. They will do a lot of structural modifications that suit their line of business. So therefore, what is the lessee doing now? The lessee is doing leasehold improvements. Which are very significant. Arey Baba, if you do such a kind of leasehold improvements where you structurally alter the whole structure, okay, आप वो पूरा space you just transform it into a multiplex, it is not going to be visible like any retail space. It's identifiable with your line of business. And if you are given a lease option of 5 years with a 5-year renewal, and PVR is the entity taking the asset on lease, why will it do such great amount of leasehold improvements if its intention is only to not exercise? It is seeing potential economic benefit. Movie goers are there in this particular area. We need to screen our movies, and that is why they have done such a heavy structural alteration. And therefore, you have done such an alteration because you believe the economic benefits of continuing are significant. And therefore, that point of time, the renewal option to be exercised, the likelihood of that is going to be very high. Otherwise, there is no point in doing structural modifications of such a nature when you do not have any intention to exercise the renewal option. So in this case, if you do lot of leasehold improvements, then at that point of time, it means that you expect the benefits more than 5 years, and hence the option is likely to be exercised. Okay. Third case, subleased the property. You have subleased for 8 years. You have subleased the property for 8 years. Suppose you have taken the property on lease, but you got a better deal elsewhere to put your office on lease, and therefore ye jo property lease mein liya humne, we put it on a sublease for 8 years. We got a good deal. We put it on sublease. Now you are having a lease period of 5 years with a 5-year renewal option, but you have already given that sublease for a period of 8 years. मतलब क्या, ये तो साफ साफ दिख रहा है, you are having an intention to continue more than 5 years. Why? Because you are having economic benefits that extend after 5 years, and therefore it is a clear-cut indication that the 5-year renewal option will be exercised, that a 5-year renewal option could be exercised. Alternatively, you could also think whether it is a critical asset, For example, a pharma company's research and development center is taken on lease. Now, every now and then you cannot change the R&D center. Okay. So you've taken the R&D center for lease for a period of 5 years, and you have an option of renewal of 5 years. So therefore, it means that you will obviously renew this asset because that asset is critical to your very sustenance. Yes, without an R&D center, pharma company kya karega? So therefore, it is a very critical asset to your operations. Alternatively, you can even consider an asset like the corporate headquarters. Headquarters is not something that can change every 5 years. Okay. And therefore, such a critical asset, you have a degree of permanence that is associated with that. And therefore, the renewal option of 5 years should be most likely exercisable, And if these are the scenarios, these are just examples. 1, 2, 3, 4 are just examples. It's not necessary that only these things are there. You may have something more than this also, but these are just examples where significant economic benefits are available to renew the lease, and therefore the lease term in such cases will be 5 years non-cancelable plus 5 years renewal option. That is 10 years. Lessee is reporting, lessee is preparing the books of accounts, lessee is deciding whether economic benefits are available to it or not. All of them are from the perspective of lessee only, and therefore it's going to be perfectly fine to take it as 10 years. You need not be very conservative and say we take it only as 5 years. It's not at all required. Okay. 5 plus 5, be realistic in your assessment. Okay. So consider significant economic benefits in case the renewal option is exercised. Acha. Alternatively, ये भी तो हो सकता है ना, that you give a lease for 10 years with a termination option. Yes. So consider economic benefits. Consider economic benefits of termination option. Consider economic benefits of termination. Now, when you talk about economic benefits of termination, the lessor will tell the lessee, listen, why do we have to renew the agreement every 15 years? Every 5 years. What I'm going to do is, I will enter into an agreement with you for 15 years. The lessee will tell, wait, I cannot give such a long and huge commitment. I do not even know whether I will be alive for 15 years. And therefore, I need the renewal option of 5 years. तो फिर वो बोलेगा, the lessor will tell, look, every 5 years we have to go to the registrar and do the registration, which is a cumbersome task. We will do a 15-year agreement. We will do a 15-year agreement, and after 5 years, you are having a termination option. After 5 years, you are having a termination option. Now, this termination option is something which is like the opposite of renewal. Okay, पहले में क्या था 5 years plus renewal option. Here it is 15 years minus the period covered under the termination option. So what are you going to look at? Well, you are going to look at whether there is an economic benefit to terminate. Whether there is an economic benefit to terminate. If yes, then you can take the period minus the terminated period as the lease term. You can take the total lease tenure minus exercise of termination option, the period under such termination. That is going to be your lease term. That is going to be your lease term. Okay, so consider economic benefits. This is again from the perspective of the lessee. This is again from the perspective of the lessee. Okay, so my lease term in substance could be the non-cancelable period, plus the renewal option, Alternatively, it could also be the total period. This is spelling mistake. Pardon me. Non-cancelable, or total period minus period covered if termination option is exercised. If termination option is exercised, this is going to be your lease term. Now, this is easy for us to assess if the termination option is at the option of the lessee, Okay, it's quite simple. I am the lessee, I am preparing the books of accounts, and therefore I know whether I will exercise the option or not. So as far as that is concerned, it's quite simple. Okay. Now, can lease term be reassessed? So initially, when you took the asset on lease, you thought that I will test the waters for 5 years. मतलब मैं देखूंगा धंधा पानी कैसे चलेगा 5 साल के लिए. I will look at how the business runs for 5 years from this location. If it goes well, I will renew it. If it does not go well, यार मैं तो बंद करके चला जाऊंगा. If it does not go well, I will cancel the lease after 5 years. So now, in the third year, you have seen that your reputation has grown in that area. Customers are coming to you for taking a share of your product or services that you are providing. Your turnover is increasing, your work is increasing, you need bigger spaces. So therefore, you need to have a presence there. This fact you came to know after 3 years. So year 0, that means when you first entered into the agreement, you thought that the lease term will be 5 years. And thinking that it will be 5 years, तुमने क्या किया? तुमने 5 years समझ के उसको the lease term, thinking it to be 5 years, you calculated your ROU asset and lease liability. Okay, so this is something that you have already done. Okay, so ROU asset and lease liability. Now 3 साल के बाद you decide I want to extend this lease by a further period of 5 years. Can you do that? Answer is a resounding yes. You can do that. It's not necessary for you to know everything at the beginning of the lease term. It is quite possible that you come to know of some facts later. And therefore, in year 4 beginning, at the beginning of year 4, when you decide to extend it, we do something known as a reassessment of lease, that is ROU asset and lease liability. ROU asset and lease liability का आप reassessment करोगे, because earlier you had the lease asset of 5 years, out of which 3 years is depreciated, so 2 years का बचा हुआ है, and you have a lease liability also. 5 years you had estimated, you have accounted for 3 years, only 2 years balance is remaining. Now when you are reassessing, you will have to increase it by a further period of 5 years, because now the asset's life is 2 plus 5, 7 years. The liability is 2 plus 5, that is 7 years. And therefore, is the reassessment permitted? Yes, the answer is reassessment is permitted. Corresponding debit or credit to ROU asset and lease liability respectively. To lease asset and lease liability respectively. So you can do a reassessment of your lease term. You can do that. Okay. Now, suppose, let us now come back to our termination option. Our termination option, that is lease with a termination option. That means there is a 20-year lease and you are giving an option for termination after 5 years. So first thing is, option is given to the lessee. You are in whose books? You are in the books of the lessee. Lessee को पता है, lessee knows that whether he will terminate or whether he will not terminate. So if this lease term is 5 years, sorry, not 5 years, 20 years with a termination option after 12 years. With a termination option after 12 years. That means 20 years is your lease period. 12 years is the non-cancelable period. क्या हो रहा है यार? Why this non-cancelable spelling mistake? 12 years non-cancelable. Okay. And I am the lessee. I am the one to decide. I am the one to decide whether I am going to exercise the cancellation option or not. So therefore, if reasonably certain, हाँ भाई मुझे पता है मुझे cancellation option exercise करना है. So if it is reasonably certain that you want to exercise it, then your lease term will be 12 years. Your lease term will be 12 years. If I am not certain of termination, okay, not going to terminate. If I am not going to terminate, then your lease term is going to be the full period of 20 years. It will be the full period of 20 years. Okay. तो ये हो गया मेरा termination option at the option of the lessee. I am the lessee. I record in my book. So I know whether it is reasonably certain I will exercise or not, or whether I will not terminate. Okay. And if I do not exercise the option, then the lease term is going to be 20 years. If I likely to exercise, I can take the lease term as 12 years and complete it. Okay. If the lease is at the option of the lessor, and this is where it starts to get interesting. And now please give me your answers. Bahut ho gaya one-way talk. Okay. Now you give me the answer. This is a lease arrangement. This is a lease arrangement for 20 years. For 20 years with a termination option at the end of the 12th year. Matlab 12 years is the non-cancelable period. After 12 years, you have the option to cancel the lease. And this option is there with the lessor. This option is there with the lessor. So now you tell me what will be your lease term. What will be your lease term? Zara soch ke batao. You are in the books of the lessee. Okay. Abhi tak we've not yet spoken about accounting in the terms of the lessor. Okay. We are in the books of the lessee, and lessor has the option to exercise. Lessor has the termination option. So therefore, you will now have to answer, okay, what is going to be your lease term? What is going to be your lease term? Terminate or not will be decided not necessarily at inception. You can decide it later also. I told you about reassessment, right? So reassessment आप कर सकते हो. You can do the reassessment later also. Okay. I will explain 2 plus 5, Jay. Okay. Tell me, if lessor has the option and you are in the books of the lessee, what will be the lease term that you will decide? We will analyze that will the lessor be benefited with the termination after 12 years? Then the lease term is 12 years. 20 years with 8 years provision of uncertainty in the books of lessor. We are not in the books of lessor. We are in the books of lessee. Lessee. Okay. You have a property. I am taking it on lease. I have to record the ROU asset and the lease liability. Now, when I have to recognize the ROU asset and the lease liability, I should know what will be the lease payment. Now, between you and me, the agreement is for 20 years. But after 12 years, you, that is the lessor, you have the option to terminate the agreement. Now, how should I record the ROU asset and lease liability? Should I base the calculations based on a lease period of 20 years? Should I base the calculations based on a lease term of 12 years? Kaise karunga main? 20 years in the books of lessee. Priya is answering. 20 years in the books of lessee. Jay is answering. What about Sheena? यार मैं लेसी हूं. Do I know what economic benefit you are going to get if you exercise the termination option after 12 years? Will I come to know? Will I imagine? Do I even know what is your financial status after 12 years? नहीं पता. अरे कई बार तो आपको खुद नहीं पता 12 साल बाद क्या होने वाला है. And you are the person who best knows about yourself. So I am an outsider. I do not know what will be your position after 12 years. So can I judge what will be your economic benefit on terminating the option? Answer is no. I cannot judge that. Okay, Sheena. So therefore, you will not consider the economic benefits of the lessor. Possible nahi hai. I cannot phone you and ask you, यार लीज टर्म एक्सटेंड करने में तुम्हारा फायदा है या कैंसिल करने में तुम्हारा फायदा है. कैन आई आस्क द लेसर दिस? आई कैनॉट आस्क हिम दिस. वो बोलेगा इट इज माई लुकआउट, व्हाई शुड आई टेल यू एवरीथिंग? ओके, इट इज हिज लुकआउट. You cannot do that. So now you tell me, do you still stick to the answer termination? You will look at economic benefit of lesser or not? What do you think? I need some more answers. Ayush, Tanushri, 12 years in the books of the lessee. Okay. Acha. Tanushri has answered 12 years in the books of the lessee. I need your answers. मुझे आप question समझ में आ गया ना सबको? Everybody understood the question? Yes. Everybody understood the question? Yes or no? Have everybody understood? बताओ लीज टर्म क्या होगा? तनुश्री अग्रहारी is saying 12 years. Vidula Deshpande is saying 12 years. Okay. Okay. All right. Any other answers? Priya Garg 20, Jay Srivastav 20. Okay. क्वेश्चन तो समझ में आ गया, ये तो सबने. अच्छा, नाउ दोज ऑफ यू हु आंसर 12 years, जरा सोचो, थिंक अबाउट इट. ओके, नाउ लेट मी टेक आवर ओन एग्जांपल. आई थिंक दैट I think, okay, that is the lessee thinks that the lessor will exercise the option after 12 years, and therefore the lease term, I take it as 12 years. When I take the lease term as 12 years, I will pass the entry ROU asset account debit to ROU asset account debit to lease liability. For how many years I will make the calculations? For a period of 12 years. Matlab, I will calculate the present value of future payments, and that future payments will be recognized for a period of 12 years. That much will be the ROU asset. ROU asset I will depreciate over 12 years. Lease liability I will prepare an amortization table and amortize it over a period of 12 years. That means in the 12th year, क्या होगा? In the 12th year, your ROU asset will be zero. Your lease liability will be zero. And after 12 years, you come to know that lessor ने option exercise ही नहीं किया. The lessor did not exercise the termination option. वो बोलता है मेरे को पूरा 20 years lease पे रखना है. I want to keep this property on lease for 20 years. And therefore, look at your position now. At the end of 12 years, your lease liability, you made it zero. But actually, you have a liability of still 8 years to go. Yes or no? That means at the inception of the contract, you have understated the ROU asset and the corresponding lease liability. This further period of 8 years is like a sword hanging on your head. अपने को पता नहीं लेसर एक्सरसाइज करेगा या नहीं करेगा. I do not know that. Okay, but I have to be prepared for the worst. याद रखो, I still have to have a little bit of conservatism here and there. Okay, I can be realistic when things relate to me and me only. I cannot be realistic when things relate to an outsider. When I am doing the accounting from the perspective of lessee has the option. If I had the option to terminate, यार मेरे को पता है कितने साल बाद मैं terminate करूंगा. That point of time, if I am certain to terminate after 12 years, I will take the period as 12 years. But in this case, the lessor has the option to terminate. How can I decide he will terminate after 12 years? I cannot. I have to be conservative only and say, हो सकता है he will continue for the entire 20 years. And therefore, for the situation where a termination option exists after a period of 12 years, at the option of the lessor, the lease term will be the full period of the contract, that is 20 years, which you will decide at the inception, at the commencement of the lease, at the commencement date. You have only this option and nothing else. Let me contrast it with debentures convertible at the option of the holder. Convertible at the option of the holder. This is a compound financial instrument. This is a compound financial instrument. Now, you would have studied 109 probably, okay? Or those of you who are sitting for November 22 or attempts thereafter, you would not have studied this, okay? You may study it, okay? Now, debentures convertible at the option of the holder. What does the company do? Even the principal portion is recorded as a liability. You follow that split accounting and do it. Okay. But you still record a liability. You still record a liability. Sir, aisa kyun? Why do we do something like this? Arey Baba, I do not know whether the holder will exercise the conversion option or not. Tomorrow, utke you cannot say that, yaar, you cannot tell the holder, देख अपना हालत तो टाइट है, तो प्लीज ना तू डिबेंचर को कन्वर्ट कर दो, तुम कैश मत मांगो. कैन यू से दैट? होल्डर बोलेगा यार कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल टर्म्स के हिसाब से I am the one who has to decide whether I want to convert or redeem, and I want to redeem and get cash for it. You just have to pay me the cash. So it is a hanging sword on you. It is a convertible option, yes, but you cannot take it in equity because the holder has the option to demand cash on redemption. So you will record it as a liability. In the same way, now the option is in the hands of the lessor, the termination option. The total lease tenure is 20 years. Out of 20, the non-cancelable term is 12. मतलब 12 तो account होगा ही होगा. But after 12 years, you as the lessee are not sure what the lessor will do. And therefore, what are you going to do? You will have to be conservative and say, bhai, it is likely that he will exercise. And therefore, there is no ifs and no buts. The lease term is going to be 20 years. The lease term is going to be 20 years. You will not assess, the lessee will not assess whether the lessor will reasonably exercise the conversion option or not. So in this case, the lessor will not, the lessee will not assess whether lessor exercises the option or not. अरे बाबा, it's not in my hands. मेरे को नहीं पता लेसर क्या करेगा. Between you and me, I do not know whether you will exercise or not. I cannot telephone you and ask every year, will you exercise? अरे ऐसा नहीं होता है. You give an option means you gave an option to him. Now you do the accounting and say that I take it as 20 years. Conservative approach hai, but it gives me a real picture. If the lessor exercises the termination option after 12 years, then I will do something with my ROU asset and lease liability. That becomes a modification reassessment approach, which we will see later. But right now, this is what is going to be your answer. At the commencement date, you will take the lease term to be 20 years. Sir, why 20 years? Because it is not in the hands of the lessee, and therefore I do not want to understate my liability. See, in Ind AS 116, the main thing that is there is your lease liability. Okay, ROU asset भी उतना important नहीं है जितना important मेरा lease liability है, because your ROU asset is calculated primarily based on the value of your lease liability. There are 3 to 4 things you add to ROU asset, but that is very clear. But the substance of ROU asset, the heart of ROU asset comes from the lease liability. And therefore, in Ind AS 116, this whole thing we are calculating, studying this standard only for the purpose of calculating the lease liability correctly. And personally, Ind AS 116 does not want the lessee to understate the lease liability. This was what used to happen in the operating lease option, which was exercised by the entity. In our example yesterday, it was exercised by SpiceJet. It understated the liability, though it had a liability for the future. Likewise, in this case, the next 8 years, there is still a probable liability. And therefore, Ind AS 116 says, when the termination option lies with the lessor, the lessee will estimate the period to be the entire period. Okay, so that suppose cancel hota hai, you can always reverse what you have assessed. But if it is not cancelled, then whatever you have presented over 12 years is an understatement. You have understated depreciation, you have understated ROU asset, you have understated the lease liability, you would have understated the finance cost on that lease liability, which is not giving a true and fair picture. And therefore, your lease term is going to be 20 years only. 20 years only, straight away. There is nothing else left for us to decide about. Okay. And then we move on to the next case where both lessor and lessee have the right to terminate. Where both lessor and lessee have the right to terminate. Okay. Before we come to this, are we clear about this part? Termination option with the lessor, what is going to be your lease term? Are we clear with this? Please give me an answer and then I shall proceed further. Okay. Please give me an answer and then I shall proceed further. Particularly those who answered 12 years. Beta, did you understand why it cannot be 12 years? Okay, so Priya Garg has confirmed. Jay Srivastav has confirmed. Vidula, Tanushri, और कौन था? Ayush किधर गया? Ayush is not there. Mahinder, Srinidhi also has not responded for quite some time. शायद गए होंगे किधर articleship पे. Okay, all clear. All right. Any doubts regarding the second case? Okay, where the termination option is with the lessor. All clear. Only 2 have confirmed. और कोई confirmation है? Yes, no. अच्छा, लगता है बस 2 ही लोग हैं live. ठीक है. All right. Anyways, I have to complete some portions today. Otherwise, standard end में extend हो जाएगा. Okay. So we will discuss the next part. इधर क्या? Both lessor and lessee have the right to terminate. In this case, what will be my lease period? See, lessor is having the right to terminate the lease. Lessee also has the right to terminate the lease. So now in this case, what is going to be the lease period? What is going to be the lease period? Lease term. What will be the lease term? Okay. So I have entered into an agreement with you. The lease term is 20 years. After 12 years, it is cancelable at my option or your option, both cases. So now you tell me in the books of the lessee, what should I take to be the lease term? Should it be 12 years? Should it be 20 years? क्या होना चाहिए? What should it be? Think. अच्छा, वही number of people watching has gone down. What should be the lease term? Anyone? Jitu is also not there today. Jay Srivastav is saying this is the same as case 1. So if it is reasonably certain, 12 years. If you are not going to terminate, it is 20 years. So Jay is saying it's exactly like case 1. Any other answers? Equals to case 1. 12 years, Deepak. I'm having new people. DJ 20 years. Tanushri is saying 20. Deepak is saying 12. Jay is saying. Okay. In this case, the standard gives a slightly different treatment. Okay. 20 bhi sahi hai, 12 bhi sahi hai, but let us look at how the standard interprets it. Okay. The standard tells, look, you terminate the lease after 12 years. You will have to check whether there is a significant cancellation penalty. You will have to check whether there is a significant cancellation penalty. Okay. Significant penalty means what? Suppose you exercise the penalty. Sorry, suppose I exercise the termination option after 12 years. In the lease agreement, it is written, whoever terminates has to pay 3 years of rent. Whoever terminates the option, whoever terminates the lease after 12 years has to pay 3 years of lease rent, has to pay 3 years of lease rent. That means today, if I terminate the option, if I terminate the lease, you, the lessor, will come up against me and say, मेरे को 3 साल का lease rent दे दो. Give me 3 years worth of lease rent. If he terminates, or in our example, if you terminate after a period of 12 years, I will come to you and say, मेरे को 3 साल का lease rent दे दो. Okay. So it is a significant penalty for both of us. Okay. 3 साल का rent देना, giving 3 years rent as a penalty is a significant amount. And therefore, if there is a significant penalty attached to the termination, this significant penalty will create an enforceable right for the counterparty. This significant penalty is going to create an enforceable right for the counterparty. And therefore, the party deciding to terminate will move back automatically and say that why should I have to pay so much of penalty? I will not pay so much of penalty. And therefore, if there is a significant penalty attached to it, the lease term is going to be the original period of 20 years. The lease term is going to be the original period of 20 years. On the contrary, if the penalty is insignificant matlab, you can terminate the lease anytime after 12 years, and you just have to give a notice period of 1 month. You just have to give a notice of 1 month. 1 month notice de do, jagah khali kar do. I will not take anything from you. You will not take anything from me. Fairly simple. So the incentive to terminate is there for both the parties. And therefore, in such a situation, the lease term will not be 20. It is going to be 12 years. It is going to be 12 years. Fair enough. So therefore, when you are having both lessor and lessee the right to terminate, you will look at whether there is a significant penalty. If yes, it will be the original lease term of the full amount. If the penalty is insignificant, it will be the lease term after deducting the period covered under the termination option. After the period covered under the termination option. Okay. So that takes care of your lease term. Sir, can I have a situation where there is a similar chart where renewal option is at the option of the lessor? Nahi hoga waisa. It will not be, because you, the lessee, know for certain that the option, the lease ends after a period of 5 years. Uske baad renewal happens after. How can you take it? You have the option whether to renew or not, right? The lessor will exercise, but you've signed it for 5 years. Okay. So your economic benefit does not have a significance there. Okay, so that is how it is going to be. So the termination option for 20 years, you have to fulfill your liability for 20 years. If it was a renewal option, you have fulfilled it in the first 5 years itself. Thereafter, what happens? You can reassess it. Okay, but in the case of termination, you cannot understate your liability. You cannot understate your liability. Okay. So that takes care of my definitions related to lease term. That takes care of my definitions related to lease term. Okay, so now what is the lease term? Well, it refers to, we'll just look at the theory of the lease term. It refers to non-cancelable period plus the renewal option, if reasonably certain that it will be exercised, plus the periods covered where there is an option to terminate, if it is reasonably certain that the termination option will not be exercised. Okay. So, yahan pe opposite likha hai, that means this is not a minus sign. So it is saying that termination will not be exercised means the period covered under that will be added to the lease term. So that is how it is. The assessment of the additional or deductible period is based on evaluation of factors that give rise to an economic incentive for the lessee, like location of asset, incurring significant leasehold improvements. We have discussed this. Rent significantly lower than the market rent in the optional period. Okay, so that is what it is. We shall look at a couple of examples. What I can give you is, I can give this for homework. Okay, please do this illustration 16, 17, question 6. Try this for homework, please. Okay, I leave it with homework because nothing to calculate, just an application of these concepts. Okay. All right. Then the termination option in a lease, option available with both the lessor and lessee. Oh, yeah. Period covered after the termination option will not be included in the lease term, assuming there is an insignificant termination penalty. Okay, so that means in our example, period after the termination, that means after 12 years. So Years 13 to 20 will not be included, assuming there is an insignificant termination penalty. Significant, you will take it as 20 years. With the lessee only, you will include the period under termination if the lessee has economic incentive to continue, that is not to terminate, and exclude in case lessee has no economic incentive to continue, what we have already done. If it is with the lessor, include the period after the termination option in the lease term. Why? Because the lessee has the obligation to make such payments. Okay. All right. Next one. Can the lease term be identified, be reassessed subsequently? Yes. You must reassess upon occurrence of a significant event like construction of leasehold improvements or business decisions like tie-ups or subleasing. We've discussed this also. Okay. So please try this also for homework. Okay. That is illustrations 18 tak, from illustration number 16. Illustration 16, questions 5 and 6, 17 and 18. Can you please do it up for homework, please? Yes, can you do it up for homework? I will be very grateful if you do it, because mera time utna bach jayega. Then I can continue with lease payments in the next class. Okay. Lease payments is the next most important part for us to pick up. Okay. All right. So please try this. Okay, next, facilities like a car parking space, is it an identified asset? It depends. Okay, if your car parking space is what you can say, for that particular flat or that particular commercial premise, there is a designated place, then it becomes an identified asset. Otherwise, it does not become an identified asset. It is just a facility that is given to you. It is just a facility that is given to you. Okay. So, Jay has raised this point, a very good point. Okay. Facility like a parking space. Okay. So, suppose I have taken, the entity has taken commercial spaces on rent. Along with commercial spaces, you get a parking facility. There are two types of parkings now. In the older buildings, there was just a space. आप जाके जिधर मर्जी है गाड़ी रखो. Go and keep the vehicle wherever you want. आपको space है, but it is not a designated space. Today you will keep it in a corner. Tomorrow you will keep it in the middle. Day after tomorrow you will keep it somewhere else. In that area only there is parking space, but it is not identified for you. So therefore, in such case, no identified asset. And therefore, any payment that you make for such parking spaces, no identified asset, this is like a non-lease component. This is like a non-lease component. Ideally, you have to segregate. But there is the accounting policy choice not to segregate, in which case you can include it in the lease of the commercial space itself, in which case you can treat it as your in the commercial space itself. However, in the newer buildings, हर बिल्डिंग के नीचे you have this tilt parking or basement parking. उधर में ना you are having the name written, shop number or office number so and so, park your vehicles here. Now that is an identified asset. उस जगह पे nobody else can do the parking. It is you and you alone who has to do the parking. So in this case, you will be having commercial space as an identified asset, a lease component. You will be having parking space as an identified lease component. So you will be having two lease components. Acha, if you do the split here between the commercial space and the parking space, the parking space would go into the P&L. But ideally, nobody does that. They will take it as a part of the lease option. Okay, they will not do the split up. As an accounting policy choice, they will prefer to take it in the lease. In this case, दोनों lease agreement है, दोनों lease component है, both of them are lease component, and because both of them are lease components, it will appear as ROU assets. अच्छा, are they highly interrelated? नहीं. Commercial space is different, parking is different. So you have to segregate it. You have to segregate the lease spaces. Okay, so this is relating to parking. I did not see some students responding. I will just request them to go through it. Tanushri, hope you understood. Jayashri, आपको समझ में आ गया? Jay Srivastav, sorry. आपको समझ में आ गया? Have you guys understood, everyone? Some of the students have probably logged out. Ayush, Sheena Jain, Srinidhi, Vidula, Priya Garg. आप सब तो कोई है नहीं. Thank you, Deepak, for your compliments. Yes. Piyush Agarwal has asked, sir, do the members have to also complete this? किधर गया उसका question? Piyush. Sir, do CA has to give exam for ICI certificate course in Ind AS? Yes. Matlab, it's not mandatory. If you want, you can give. Okay. If you want, you can give. So that is optional. वो कोई mandatory चीज तो है नहीं. Okay. All right. It's all clear. So with that, we have completed lease term today. Do the homework questions which I have given you. Tomorrow onwards, I mean Saturday, I have to take up lease payments and we have to do a couple of questions on accounting. Okay, तो ये दो चीजें हमें करना है किसी भी हाल में. So maybe Saturday's class will extend a little bit more than what I normally extend, but that should take care of the class that is there on Tuesday, because the coming Tuesday is going to be a very important session. It deals with specialized cases like sale and lease back, those kind of situations, reassessments, modifications. Okay, so that part is very important, for which I have to spend and dedicate an entire session for that. Okay, so with this we conclude today's session. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Deepak. Thank you, everyone. And if there is any query that you have, you can always reach out to me via email. Okay, you are free to reach out to me via mail also. Okay, so it is fr-final@icai.in. एक second ना, let me just confirm. ICI.in रहता है, ICI.org, fr-final. Yes. So this is 1 second, please. I'll give you. Yes, ICAI.in. Okay. So this is the final. This is the mail ID on which you can send your queries. Okay. All right. Period covered if termination option is exercised. Jay, किसका बात कर रहे हो? Are you talking about this part where both have the right to terminate? Then if that is the case, then you look at significant penalty or insignificant penalty and take a call. Okay. Whereas in the case of termination, are you looking at this part? Period covered if termination option exercised. I'm not sure what you are referring to. Okay. मेरे को नहीं समझ में आ रहा है. Okay. All right. Let me know if there is anything. Okay, Jeff, you can always mail me. I'm reachable there. Okay. So we conclude today's session. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and see you on Saturday morning. Okay. Do the homework and we'll also pick up any queries which are left from here. Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Vidula. Thank you.